Okay, welcome everyone. So I guess we will start off with the second meeting of the Utility Advisory Committee. And if I guess go down the full list here.
Talk in your mic, please. I'm sorry.
Okay, items listed on the agenda may be taken out of order. Two or more agenda items for the consideration may be combined, and or any item in the agenda may be removed. Related discussion may be delayed at any time. So at this point, we're calling the meeting to order, and the first point on the agenda is public comment. So everybody, public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. Each person has up to 5 minutes to speak on a specific agenda item. So I'll open up the floor now.
Good evening. For the record, Fred Volz. In looking at tonight's backup package, I would like to make a couple of comments about the capital improvement budget, the 4 pages that was listed line by line, but also make a recommendation, since there were no specific pieces of information about the 4 companies that submitted RFPs for the condition assessment study and the 6 who submitted RFPs for the rate study, that for the next meeting, we have a summary of what they're proposing to do by company, and also the costs that they're proposing for each one of their submissions. That probably would be useful if we can't especially have the people come in and make presentations one by one for timing purposes or availability purposes. That would be a good way of starting the discussion about which one the advisory committee would be recommending to the city. Going to the capital improvement budget, I was somewhat trying to piece this together and having a real problem. 44 of the entries are either missing a budgeted amount or a spent amount. Even if they were going to be put on hold, you'd think that there would be one or the other or both of those. And for whatever reasons, it was missing from the 4 pages of listings. Another observation is that in looking at the 2020 capital project, that's projects list that's being proposed of about $9 million, we have $6.6 million for the BC TAP in pieces, but we don't really know if that's going to be the completion of that project, and it's a significant amount of the total capital improvement budget, or if there's going to be still more and there'll be material. So that would be a good issue to be probing the utilities director for the city about, to have some more clarity. I was concerned also that in totaling up the budgeted amounts versus the spent amounts, the budgeted amounts were over $40 million, but the actual spent amount was just under $14 million. And I'm concerned that we're not doing a good job of following along with these projects, that we need to have more clarity about where they are, how important they are, and hopefully a prioritization of those. I'm also hoping there'll be some clarity about if there's any direct payback by any of the BC utility customers requesting or solely benefiting from any of the CIP expenditures. Thank you.
Thanks. Is there anyone else? Okay, we'll close the comment period then and go on to the agenda. So I have a statement that I would like to read. So for disclosure purposes and in that process of trying to do the right thing, I want to make sure that it's clear what happened, I guess. So I'm just going to read it so I don't screw up. So in the process of trying to keep things inclusive and fair, I sent an email requesting input on the proposed agenda of this meeting to the full committee. I received 2 emails which I returned with a few brief comments CCing the full committee. It was pointed out to me later that this could be a violation of the open meeting laws, since all the committee members were included in the emails and possible discussion could have happened. Agenda items were not discussed among the full committee, and there was no intent of wrongdoing. Once the possible problem was brought to my attention, the emails were stopped. No emails will be sent from the full committee to any other committee at any time in the going forward. So, just thank you.
Can I comment on that, or am I allowed to?
I guess we can.
Yes, so since I'm unfamiliar with the open meeting law, I called up the ethics people, and they said it wasn't their thing, that I should talk to the Attorney General, and so it seemed like a heavy thing to do. But anyway, and the Deputy Attorney General, my understanding, Gregory Ott, said we hadn't done anything wrong. I'm just confirming what Larry's saying. So I don't think anything was wrong, but that I'm sort of agreeing with what he's saying, that it was a gray area and that it could easily slip into doing something wrong. And I called the pool pack guy up who confirmed that, but he said the Attorney General decides that. The Attorney General seemed surprised that we didn't have a lawyer that we could consult independent of the city. Now, I'm unfamiliar with all this. I'm just saying what he told me. He was surprised. He said usually in other cities, he seemed to imply they have that. So it's just a comment to avoid calling those guys up every time we have because we need to obey the law, not what we're told is the law, and they decide what the law is. So, but basically, I'm agreeing with you.
Well, part of the training we had was if there was, first off, there was wrongdoing where it was supposed to be mentioned at the next meeting, and since it was a possible injunction, we're trying to start things off right. And I'm trying to learn. I've done several meetings. I've done many of meetings in my career, but not the open law meeting, and it seems to be a lot different. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm not stubbing my toe as I go along the way. So. Okay, I think the first thing I just got a few comments too before we get into the agenda. I think we were discussing or not discussing, it's been put out there that we would have the meetings every first Wednesday of the month. Is that agreeable to everybody? Go ahead.
That's agreeable for me, but I will miss October and November because I have travel plans.
I don't have a problem with it. That will be fine with me.
No problem.
You need to go order on the agenda, approve the minutes.
So the only thing, so number 6 was actually the discussion on future meetings
Okay.
and the stuff that goes with that. You can take it out of order.
Take it out of order.
Yep.
But there has to be a structured discussion on every topic.
Okay, so let's see, I think okay, we'll go with it at the end then. I just thought it'd be something to clarify in the beginning. Okay, then in the minutes, unfortunately, I think there might have been confusion, and maybe it was led by me when I had a question or two. First off, I think the minutes are too detailed. And the second thing that happened, it doesn't appear that they had time for review. So I had several comments to make on them. So I cannot approve them, and we don't think we have the time to go over the changes tonight. So what I'd like to suggest is that each committee member that has any comments, if I can do it, I'd be willing to do it. If the city has to do it, but each of us send our comments in, and then approve them next meeting.
And if I could comment, I appreciate that. What we were attempting to do originally was to make them as brief as possible. And we flat just kind of ran out of time, to be honest with you. So we took the recorded minutes and kind of threw them in there, and as quickly as we could, we got something in there to talk about. But totally agree with you. I think if we can get comments back, we'll put a little more effort and we can put them on the next meeting.
Okay. So if there were whoever had comments, so I guess send it through to you or
Just
okay. Just send.
Well, I'm going to introduce. You can send them to me, but I am going to. Well, since you brought that up, I'm going to introduce you, Joshua Hardy. He is actually new, so he's like a lot of us here, and so he'll be helping with that. And just so you know, the intent of the minutes is to reflect decisions that are made accuracy of discussions, but not everything, because that's too painful for all of us. Hopefully we can get that to where they're accurate. They'll certainly comment and have the details on any motions that are made and those votes that happen with regards to motions, if we have any in those meetings. And then where we think there's important discussion and topics. If it's just a lot of discussion and back and forth, then we don't necessarily need to include all of that, but try to avoid it being, 8 pages.
Sure, that sounds good. Can we incorporate action items?
As far as action items that are taken,
Yes.
the action items that are taken will definitely be in the minutes.
Okay, because I didn't see any action items on this minutes. It said things would be done, but in my opinion, when you say you're going to do something, that's an action item. And it's easier if we can break them out as an
I
action
think there was a
item.
lot of discussion on what staff would provide. I don't know that there was ever a motion taken on it, just because it was so informational to begin with. I think as we refine our agenda items and start to make real motions, then certainly they'll be included in there.
Okay, I guess that might be another aspect between the open meeting law and the other meetings.
Right.
I've-
Well, and I'll just give you a simple example is, what's the contractual capacity of the SNWA for providing water to, is that an action item or is that just a question? In my mind, that's just a question that staff can respond to.
And I agree with that.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of if it's, if we ask for like a package or something, like a detail or more, sometimes if we put an action item
Then you
down,
can absolutely direct staff.
that would be
Yep.
easier than, and if, if time gets, it takes too much time, we can just sort of leave that action item and we all remember
Sure.
what was the intent. So that's what I'm saying. And I think also it might relieve some of the detail because then you would put, some of the detail would go into the action item and
Sure.
that's the final aspect of a discussion.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
So is the action on the minutes to pull the minutes and bring it back?
Yes.
Yes,
So that needs to be a motion, form of motion.
okay. See, if I understand the position, though, it's usually the motion is somebody other than the chair?
You can make it.
Okay, so the motion is that we have comments from each, whoever has comments from the committee, please submit their changes to the, well, before I go into that, if I can make a suggestion, would it be possible to get the Word document and then we could do red line strikeout? Would be,
No. We'll provide summarized minutes to you, and then at the meeting, you can approve them or you can make your comments and revise them on the floor. We will provide the minutes to you summarized, staff will, and then you can approve them or make your comments at your meeting in an open forum. We can't be commenting, taking action and suggestions outside of the open meeting. So we will bring the minutes back to you for action, and if you have comments or suggestions or revisions, you will do that at the meeting.
So does that mean you want all of our comments on this packet of minutes?
No, I think the motion, well, I don't know if you're going to remove them, but the motion should just be remove the minutes from the agenda, and then they'll come back in the next meeting, revised.
I think that puts the onus on staff to do the revision, not on the committee.
Yes.
okay. So I guess the motion then would be then just a simple motion to remove the minutes as you stated. And then we'll have the minutes from the last meeting, July 31st, and this meeting in the next meeting to approve, to go over and approve.
Yep.
Now, can we get those meetings earlier though? Is there a possibility before the final package?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, go ahead and, you want, I guess.
I second the motion.
And I'll already second.
Oh, but
But his mic wasn't on.
Okay, so that continued, the minutes then.
You need to call for the vote.
Oh, yeah.
Vote for. Motion. To approve, okay.
There's a motion, second on the floor, now you need to vote.
Okay, now, all in favor of passing the motion?
aye.
Aye. The motion is passed then. So I guess that would that be an action item, or was that just part of the agenda?
Mr. Chair.
No, I think
All action item, that is an action item, and all action items say on the agenda for possible action.
Well, the minutes are a general, that's a general agenda item anyway.
right.
It is, but it says for possible action. You cannot take action unless that verbiage is in there. That is a requirement of the open meeting law. So any action items say for possible action. If there's a presentation, that's not an action item, you would just receive it. There's nothing for you to take action on. You don't approve it. You're just being offered a presentation by staff. Minutes are always action items, though, yes.
Okay, see, I see the difference that the action items in the other meetings are just things that you're trying to get done as you go through. This one, you're saying we have to have action. So I guess if we could find some way to sort of, if we're requesting certain things and they can't necessarily be done at the next meeting, then it's nice to have some way to go forward with something. That's what I'm trying to get across. So whatever we could do that and have that in the minutes would be helpful. Okay, thank you. So going on to the next agenda item is a presentation, I believe, from the financial officer, or is it?
It's actually from me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But
I had one quick question, if I may, for him, actually. Yes, would you rather take questions at the end or during your presentation? I don't want to interrupt you if you prefer to.
I'm fine either way. But
Okay,
during is fine.
okay.
Plus, what if you forget towards the end because I talk too much? So, let's see. If you don't mind, I'm actually going to sit down here just in case I need to refer to anything. What we just put together is a general presentation on the operating and capital budget, as well as some historical and kind of projected information, really just to give you a snapshot and an idea of what's going on with the utility. It's not like we have the rate study person on board doing this. This is the utility director doing a quick and dirty, just very high level, what the projections look like when we get to that discussion. But I am going to start with just the operating and maintenance budget. Some of you may have reviewed this just because you were around while we were having discussions on the operating budget for 2020, but I don't know if everybody would have that opportunity, so we thought we'd just start with that. There is a utility administration budget that basically we transfer in different revenue from the utilities, and that's what that looks like. As we move forward, I can talk a little bit more about that, but that's basically what that is. As far as what that money gets spent for, obviously it comes from the other utilities. It goes towards central services, which in this case is $503,000. That really is for actually the rate study itself is included in that. Pool packed insurance is included in that as well. Administration costs shown there, the $871,000 is essentially myself and Joshua and some other salaries that are more of the administrative salaries that do work in all the utilities. The $657,000 that you see there is essentially the billing and collection staff that actually work in the finance directors group in finance. Capital projects, in this case, that is $395,000 for vehicles. And then there's the transfer to the general fund, which this year is $1,025,000 for that transfer.
Okay, so you have the capital projects and you have the one, so vehicles are in the capital projects, and I'm sorry, what was the 1.2, 1 million for?
$1,025,000 is transferred to general fund.
And what's that
That's
needed
just
for?
to cover IT, HR, those support services that support the utility. I believe that number was the number that was used in the rate study. I think the city has a policy where they'll reduce that to no more than $1 million going forward. But that's what that is.
And then, so you're saying on the capital projects, the vehicles are vehicles related to the utilities?
Correct.
How come they're not in just the utility?
Well, and to even complicate this a little further, if you'll be patient, there's actually, we're right in the middle of creating a vehicle. Essentially, it's a fund where revenues will go in and fund vehicles moving into the future, both for the general fund and the utility fund. I'm going to try to remember what it's called. The VERF, the Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund. So historically, it's been done different ways, and so they're cleaning that up, I think, is the best way to put that, so that it's easy to see, easy to review, easy to know which vehicles and equipment are being funded by the general fund, which ones are being funded by the utility fund, moving into the future. So this is how it is now. You're going to see shortly, I think there's a presentation going to City Council soon. Second meeting in September that will clarify that. And of course, we could bring that forward to this group as well. But that's something the new purchasing manager's been working on since he arrived. Electric utility, whoops, get over there. Electric utility, clearly it makes sense that the majority of the revenue for the electric utility is coming from, sales of electricity. There are some miscellaneous revenue shown there in the $145,000, which is basically late charges. And then there's the transfers in. That is a combination of solar and land sale for capital.
So that's part of the capital improvement fund that's been developed and been voted on, is that correct?
Correct. As far as, just to give everybody an idea of what electric revenues, and I don't have it here, I just have it in my notes, but I think it's important. Electric revenues in 2015 were about close to $12 million. In 2019, they were about $14 million. So, they're basically, the reality is our demands are flat. So that difference is really the rate increases that have taken effect since they started doing the rate increases. What looks like it's been about a $2 million difference, which kind of comports percentage-wise. It's
Also, that additional funds has come in from the new electric meters, which are now reading proper input into residences to our billables.
correct.
That's where the major cost increase came from, was the new revenue meters. So everybody knows that is not a rate increase, that is a true revenue read of electrical being consumed in the businesses and residences.
Operating maintenance budget with regards to where the money is spent in the electric utility operations, and I'll get into that a little bit more, but that is a little over $3 million. Power purchases are about $6.2 million. We have a separate non-electric fund. I think while we're having this discussion, this is really important to note because, we're different from NV Energy because we have street lights. We provide for various functions that happen throughout the year, like art in the park, and there's salary and time and energy and effort that goes into that, and even the electrical for a lot of these facilities, we do that work as well. So that's partially what that non-electric fund is for. It's purely estimated. We do embedded in the actual electric budget. There's also time that we spend on those types of activities that aren't directly related to delivering electricity to a customer or doing maintenance and operations on a power pole or the actual electric system.
I'm confused because as an enterprise fund, you shouldn't be spending money on anything other than that enterprise. Correct?
Typically, the enterprise funds would be purely for the electrical system and for those folks that are being metered by the electrical system. That's why they separated out the non-electric, but the reality is the revenues from that are being covered by the customer base.
I'm still a little confused because expenses out of a enterprise account should only go towards
And
that
I
function.
would agree with you with that, and my view on this moving forward is that those expenses would be put into the appropriate general fund categories moving forward at some point in time where we can better define them and get a better handle on what they actually are. And then we would just charge to them for doing that work, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if we're doing work on a pump for a golf course, I'm making stuff up, but that would be an example of, that really isn't for the electric system, but it might be something we do because guess what? We do that work. And historically that hasn't been in public works, but they don't have an electrician, they don't have those types of people. It's always been done by the electrical group.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not the only issue like that. It's not, and frankly, it's not a significant dollar amount, but it does do what you just said. It takes away from the purity of what an enterprise fund, if you will. So,
I had a quick question also. It's from a complete outsider. But when I go and buy something, I don't pull out 5 wallets and then transfer money, So what I was seeing is there's money coming from somewhere that goes into the utility fund. Then it goes from there into the utility administration fund. It goes from the utility administration fund into the general fund. And then it goes to its final destination. Wouldn't it be simpler from a civilian point of view, not an expert obviously, to just take the money from where it came in and take it to its final destination rather than move it through these intermediate funds?
so I think the answer to that is, and I'm going to look towards the director of finances, at one point in time, these were all combined. So what they've tried to do moving forward is when did we separate them, Diane? So they've only been separate for a certain amount of time. So that's basically how they started to get a handle on which, the accuracy of the numbers between electric, water, sewer, essentially. So it's a work in progress.
So if I'm understanding correctly, then will that probably be looked at more closely in the rate study?
It could be, yes. Yeah, they could look at how we're doing that. I mean, it does look a little confusing because of the way the administrative charges are handled. At the end of the day, what we're mostly concerned about is the accuracy right now.
No, I understand, but it is very hard to follow on
yeah.
these different documents and trying to
Right.
figure out. And I think when we're trying to look at what may be needed for future rate increases, those are type of things that a lot of us probably look at.
Oh, yeah, and that'll be absolutely built into their cost of service work that they're going to be doing.
Yeah, because I agree with Eileen that if it's a community event, then that sounds like it should become more of a general fund, not out of the electric fund. So there again, it would help.
It could be, and there's no,
Stabilize.
at the end of the day, it's still kind of sort of coming from the same customer base. It's just the way that revenue is generated to provide that service.
Well, not necessarily, because the person using electricity, paying for electricity, if you have to increase the rate for electricity to cover this, you might be able to get it from some other funds that wouldn't affect the same body.
Yeah. I don't think you're hearing any argument from here.
Okay, sorry, I
No,
misunderstood what you said then.
it's,
Sorry.
it's frankly, it's the way it had been done. And those are the things we're looking at modifying and changing as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Where was I? Capital projects, and we're going to show you those moving forward. That's about 6.4 million. Again, there's your transfers out. So, and then what we show is the 20%, which is the required reserve amount on the O&M budget. Just to give you an example, because we didn't provide detailed spreadsheets of the budgets, but I did want to make it clear that with regards to the operations portion of the budget, oops, I guess I should actually go to the next slide. That would be good. About 1.7 million of that is for salaries and benefits and everything that goes along with that. 1.4 million of that is for operations. Of that 1.4 million, about $1 million are annual expenses for equipment for electrical. So let's talk about water. Same thing, we charge obviously for the water that we sell to our customers. 81% of that revenue for the O&M budget comes from water sales. Again, to give you an idea, on the water side, in 2015, we sold about $6.3 million in revenues. In 2019, that was up close to 11. So that would clearly sales again, or, I think we showed on the last presentation on the 31st, demands have been pretty flat, so that would tell you that's mostly come from the rate modifications that were made. And then again, the transfers in, that's about 500,000 of the 1.5 million is for solar leases, and then about $1 million from land sales.
Dennis, I'm seeing 7% put into the water fund for sales tax. Where is that sales tax derived from?
The infrastructure sales tax? I'm sorry, and I didn't even comment on that. I'm sorry. So the infrastructure sales tax is a quarter-cent sales tax that was approved by the Clark County Commission a number of years ago. And since you asked this question, I'll go ahead and give a budget or an update because it's an opportunity. We get a portion of that water and sewer revenue basically for capital improvements and or debt service on infrastructure. That revenue is collected by the Southern Nevada Water Authority and delved out to the agencies. So we benefit significantly in getting $850,000 plus or minus from that sales tax. That sales tax was scheduled to sunset in, I believe it's July of 2024. Just yesterday, the Clark County Board of Commissioners approved unanimously to remove that clause, so we don't have to worry about that revenue source disappearing overnight in July of 2024. It might have been 2025. I can't remember exactly. Obviously, the city of Boulder City spoke in support of the removal of that sunset clause. We anticipate that, hopefully going up close to $1 million in the future. And it is a significant revenue source. Had they not approved that removal of that sunset clause, we would have had to raise rates almost overnight by 15%, or not done as, capital projects, or not been able to apply it towards debt service.
So this 7% is coming from Clark County's sales tax, a quarter cent?
Yep.
And how are they figuring that amount of money? Is that per million gallons per day sold? Is it?
That's just sales. This is on goods and services that are sold. Are you talking about the percentage that comes to Boulder City?
Well,
I'd have to get you that. I think it's, I think it might be customer. I have to go back and look. I can't remember honestly.
Well, the reason I'm asking, do we have a sunset clause to recapture that money should it go away? In other words, how are we going to fix that deficit if they vote next year to cancel the quarter cent tax for infrastructure? In other words, what are we going to do with the city of Boulder City?
I don't foresee that happening. And the reason I say that is because that's the only sales tax measure that I'm aware of that's ever actually had a sunset clause. And so now that it's gone, it's in line with all the other sales tax revenue sources. And so I just don't see that happening.
Thank you.
And there's a really good reason on top of that why. that would, for us, it's a big number, but for the water authority, that's a huge number. And that it could impact a number of things, specifically bond covenants and things like that, so. Water utility fund money, again, just to kind of, where does that money go? Operations is up close to 1.9 million. Water purchases about 4.5 million. Again, capital projects, about 1.5 million. You can see there the debt service for the raw water line, which we've talked about. We'll talk about a little bit more later. Transfers out, about a little over 1 million, and again, the 20% for the reserve.
Can you explain that reserve to me?
So there is a reserve policy, and we're going to get to that in a little bit with some slides, but the reserve policy is that there is a 20% on each utility that's put into a reserve account. And that's essentially for all the utility funds.
What's it for?
For cash flow
Just
purposes.
cash flow,
So,
okay.
it's not aligned with industry standards. Some of them do it different. They'll do a certain number of months of revenue, or there's different options, but in this case, they just, city council approved at 20%, so.
No, but that's not in addition, so that, because basically from some of the documents I've seen, that's already been established at a
Yeah, it
specific
just sits in the
rate.
account. So we'll show that in a little bit too.
Okay, I didn't see the clarification later on, so thank you.
So so, yeah. Operation and maintenance budget. So, again, hold it. This looks weird. Something went goofy. That's wastewater. There we go. Water utility fund. That still looks funny though. Oh, category, name, percentage. We got something goofy going on with the presentation. Anyway, I can tell you what it says. Operations is about 64% of where the money goes. Salaries is about 36%. So salaries is about 688,000. The operations is about 1.2 million. For the purposes of the water utility fund, that's about close to 800,000 in equipment and materials and all those things that go with operating and maintaining the utility. 200,000 of that is for the condition assessment study on water. Now we'll look at the slide that for whatever reason didn't work up here, but works on mine that I printed out. Water and wastewater. Oh, that is water utility. That is odd. Okay, anyway, the 2020 wastewater utility fund, again, customer charges, that all comes from the bills that we send our customers. So that's 82%, or about 1.8 million. The transfer in for capital is about 400,000, and that's from land sales revenue. And I apologize for that slide. I don't know why it did that.
Yeah, you're missing the slide before that is what part of the problem.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll figure it out. But where the wastewater utility fund money goes, let's see if that one works. Still doesn't work. Well, the numbers are correct. We don't have the percentage, but I can give them to you. So the percentages for operations is 48%. The percentages that goes to capital is about 37%. And the transfers out are about 15%. Again, operations is a little over $1 million for the wastewater utility fund. Capital projects for 2020 is $800,000. About 400,000 of that, just as an FYI, is coming from land sale revenue. Transfers out are shown there as 337,000. And then the required 20% reserve.
I had a quick question, just a general question. I'm finding it hard to digest the speed at which the extra information is coming in. Is there anywhere where the things that you're telling us, where we can read that somewhere, like the extra information you're giving us?
Sure.
I mean, because I couldn't be writing a warp. It's just for information. I mean,
Yeah, we can certainly add the information I provided, I guess, to the slides. I'm trying to figure out the easy way to do
actually, I
it.
guess it's recorded, so I
It-
can just
it
go
is
back and
definitely
listen to
recorded.
it. Yeah. Sorry, forget it.
That's
I
an
can-
option.
That's good enough. Sorry.
It's just one of those things, is how much information you put on one slide.
Well, I think in some cases that would be helpful is actually have some spreadsheet information behind this. If we could, as the committee, have spreadsheet information and then do, as we follow this, or beforehand would be happy.
And we can absolutely do that. You know, the reality is, moving forward, you're going to see lots of detailed information. So this is really more of a high level, because you guys are going to be receiving information from the rate study consultant. That's going to be, they're going to have the opportunity to real time have the spreadsheets up on the screen. They'll be able to real time make modifications to the capital improvement plan so that you can see what those impacts are. They can do that graphically. And so I think moving forward, you can definitely get that. We can easily get you the detailed budgets. I mean, they're on the city website for each utility. I'm just trying to give you a synopsis in general of what they go to. So we can certainly provide you those spreadsheets from each utility. That's online. It's available. Anybody can get that information now.
Okay, I'm not sure I didn't find it when I was looking, so maybe I wasn't looking properly.
Okay, but no problem. I can get each budget for each utility.
Or just show us what the link is if you wanted to.
Yeah, we can just send it out. We can either send the link or we can actually send the data.
Okay.
For 2020. It's easy to do.
Appreciate it.
Again, where does the wastewater utility fund money go? That one still is doing what it's doing, but nonetheless, operations is about $700,000 on the wastewater side. Salaries are about $334,000 on the wastewater side. Equipment and chemicals is about $400,000 of the $700,000, and then we added to this year's budget the $200,000 for the condition assessment work on the wastewater side. And finally, this pie is still not working either, but the landfill, which is, pretty simple compared to the other funds because it's mostly contract. We receive about $1.56 million in revenues from our billing our customers for waste management purposes. There's a little bit of fund balance that was used this year. In general, that operating budget, operating revenue consistently is about $1.2 million. Where does it go? 76% of that is for the contractual services. 14% is capital, which we're going to talk about the capital projects a little bit more moving forward. And it's just a small amount of money for operations. That could be landfill consulting services, things like that. And then the transfers out and the 20% reserve on the operating side. This slide really just shows you all the expenditures combined. So back in the days, which wasn't that too long ago, this is how we portrayed everything because all the funds were combined together. But really, it just gives you an idea that a significant component of all of the utilities combined, almost 30% of that is for capital. Between water and electricity purposes, you're close to a little over 30%. 10% of maintenance, contractual services, benefits, and salaries make up about 14% of all of the utilities, and then the transfers to the general fund. So that's just to give you kind of a highlight of where that money is spent. capital improvement for 2020, as you can see, the BC tap to Buchanan overhead line is in there. The 4 kV continuing to make that conversion from 4 to 12 kV. There's some work on substation 5. That's as well as just normal capital equipment purchases that have been included for various things that come up during the year in addition to the equipment that we already have, and then a conversion on Claremont. And so what I wanted to do right now while we're in the capital improvement plan, and we're going to talk about it again in number 6, because there's discussion that we're going to have on future meetings and how best to structure those timing-wise as we move forward. It just so happens that this committee started when it started, and we're right in the capital improvement process for the entire city. So I have some thoughts to discuss about. So kind of, if there's detailed questions on the capital improvement projects, I'd kind of like to maybe save those for later as we move through this, and then as we get to have that discussion. What I'm really trying to get to with my rambling is I'm trying to minimize the number of meetings, because you guys are obviously tasked with looking at the capital improvement plan, and we're also going through the city's capital improvement plan process at the same time right now. And so that, trying to avoid having the same meetings twice if possible. So we can have that discussion in a little while. So that's it for the electrical, for capital improvement, for water. And I'm not sure why this should have said water. We have some commercial large meter older vaults that are in need of replacement, some backflow prevention devices that are in need of replacement. So there's some revenue, capital project revenue shown for that. The private cross-connection control program, and this is a program, it's a state mandated program. I will tell
Dennis,
you.
Sorry to interrupt. The slide needs to go forward.
Oh, whoops. I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you. Where'd he go? Come on.
Probably back.
There
right
it is. I will tell you there's work to be done on the cross-connection control program, in that we have a variety of devices that that we have a mix. We have a mix of commercial that own theirs, and there's some other commercial that we own. And I don't have any good answers on why they are the way they are, but that's something that's just got to be cleaned up, something we're going to work on in the future. But so some of that money may go towards cleaning that up, but the reality is that program needs some definition and some work because we have a combination of public-private. On the private side, typically what you have to do as a utility is just manage and make sure they're doing their annual testing. If we decided that we were going to own them all, then we would be required to get the testing done and manage that ourselves. It's done in both ways in different utilities. We just, for whatever reason, have a mix of public and private. Anyway, we can talk about that more later. But water main replacement program, that's obvious what that is. Copper service replacement projects. This is not unusual in any of the utilities I've worked on. Frankly, copper, just services in general are high maintenance and typically require a lot of replacement. They have a lot of leaks. We have areas of town specifically that need to be addressed, and so annually we've been putting some time and energy towards those. Sometimes it's on an as-needed basis because we have a leak or a significant leak, but we are trying to get ahead of that, and that's the purpose of that program. I know that everybody loves to talk about the El Dorado Valley Waterline project. There are a need for pressure-reducing valves on that pipeline so that it can actually be used appropriately. And so there's money for that. and then just some overall access and security improvements that we need to do, essentially to comply with our emergency response plans and vulnerability assessments that we've done for NDEP, which is our regulatory agency. Uh-oh. Oops. Sorry about that. On the sewer side, we have some revenue in there for some, what I would call some hot spots in the system. It's minimal. Frankly, the sewer main replacement, relocation abandonment, the sanitary sewer rehab, those two, I anticipate them to change when we get this work done on the studies in the next 6 months, because we're going to have way more information. So there's no real defined projects. There's money for that in the event we know there's something we have to do, but the reality is the condition assessment work's really going to define that program.
Those two top items, the 100,000 and the 300,000, is any of that money earmarked for the Boulder City rehab, the Boulder City street rehab coming into Boulder City?
No, and I probably won't get this as accurate as I would. There were projects that had revenue remaining, or they didn't utilize as much of the funds that were necessary. There was some of the projects that were going to be done ahead of time that had money in the previous plans. They were just moved into the Boulder City Parkway project because it made sense to do it all at one time while we were there. But that detail is actually that item went to council about 2 months ago. It had the detailed breakdown of where that money came from at each specific project. I just don't know it offhand, but it is available.
It is in the back of the packet program. All those details are in the back of this packet. I've read through this whole thing. So it's already listed in there as to a breakdown of every sewer project, what was postponed, what was carried forward, and stuff like that. So it's got pretty good detail in this agenda packet.
Yeah, but as far as the official item that went to council, it's defined in there as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
For all of these projects, all of this projected capital improvement plan revenue is all from solar. In fact, so 500,000 of it is from solar. The remainder is land sale revenue. Oops, and I take that back. That was for the water side. For the wastewater side, 400,000 is land sale revenue. And then there's 400,000 for the headworks upgrade. Just a quick comment on the headworks upgrade, because we are looking at maybe possibly doing something different with that treatment plant in order to be able to utilize the effluent in a different manner than just disposing it in the desert. What we're looking at doing there is probably pushing that out for now. And doing some very temporary improvements in the channel going into that headworks. That would probably be less than $50,000, because I don't really want to go spend $400,000 and decide we're going to do totally something different with that plant. So that's what we're looking on doing with that for now.
So in that case, I'm sorry, that was the one that the $400 was being transferred into for?
That $400,000 in this case is really from fund balance from actually rates.
Okay, so the two other ones on top is three.
Two other ones are for land sale, land sale revenue.
Okay, so they would be utilized, and the 400,000 then would. I'm just trying to get an idea later on as we go through, trying to understand how some of the money will be earmarked.
Yeah.
So when it's not done, then the money that is supposed to be coming from the capital fund.
It'll just sit in the fund balance, be a part of the
It just
cash
stays
flow.
there, then comes back when the project gets there.
Correct.
Okay. Because that's another one that's sort of confusing with the rate process of where the money comes in, and sometimes it's showing and sometimes it's not. I guess through the transfers, but just trying to understand all the transfers.
Right, and it'll be, obviously this is information with regards to where the revenue is coming from that the rate study consultant will specifically, show where the revenue's coming from. Because the reality is, and going back to the discussion we had on the on the expense side or on the revenue side, that land sale is revenues is unusual. It's not revenue that a utility would typically have if they are a pure enterprise fund. It's certainly helpful because it is available to go towards capital projects in the utility funds, but it's it's something that's different as well that Boulder City has that not a lot of hardly any other utilities have. Landfill again is, landfill. There is some work that's going to need to be done with regard to phasing. We'll be working with the health district on that. It's just minor modifications to the permit. It's unknown what that's going to be, but I don't think it'll even be $60,000 worth of work. And that's really more consulting. Perimeter fencing and maintenance road design. There were some recommendations that came out of some previous work when the landfill acreage was expanded to 100 plus acres. We will likely not be doing this work this year. We're going to be working with the health district to get a better definition on what we think that is. There was some road work that was anticipated that needed to be done that was more related to stormwater. I think we have some opportunity to basically delay that work. I don't think it's really necessary now, but I wouldn't want to tell you that until we got some feedback from the health district that they were comfortable with that. But there isn't any, it really comes down to, is there any significant erosion occurring on the face of the landfill or within the landfill that could damage the landfill itself. And unfortunately, both times I thought it was going to storm this year, I went out there and it didn't storm. So, because I just wanted to see it myself. So I'm not going to run out there anymore because maybe it'll actually rain if I don't. But we just didn't have any good storm events. So. A little bit of information on our reserve and some of the other rate stabilization funds. We talked about the 20% with regards to the operating budget. So you saw each one of those numbers. That was a policy that council put into place, and it includes everything: airport fund, cemetery fund, general fund, and all the utility funds. Just to make sure that's clear, because it says budgeted general fund. It's actually all the funds. That 20%. So that was a council policy.
Now, is that related to, though, that is everything but capital? Because if I understood in one.
So that's just operating. So we're gonna jump to capital next.
No, but the 20% is related to more than just operating, from what I understood. I thought that's what I understood. So 20% is just the operating.
It is just the operating and does not include capital because there's a separate emergency capital reserve account.
So you take 20% of the operating costs of each utility? Because it seems like it's a little more than that.
We can check that math for you.
Okay, because that's why I was
just to make sure. No, I got you. Yeah, we can check that.
Okay, that's what I was trying to. And then, but most of those are already funded, except for what increases need if the money, the funds are going up.
They're pretty close to funded.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you won't see that number won't. So when we look at the projections moving forward, they'll be essentially the same every year, as far as the reserve account goes. Utility rate stabilization reserve account.
I had a quick question. There was a slide where it looked like the money in the emergency capital reserve account was like on order of $7 million or something like that.
So this
Yeah,
slide-
that's the number I'm looking at, yeah.
Yep, so the emergency capital reserve account was also established by city council. With regards to the general fund, that's the $5 million.
I was just curious what do we do with that money? Because on 1 month treasuries, you can get 2%, year interest, if it's just sitting there doing nothing.
It's still earning interest according to the finance director.
How is it invested?
We have investments, maybe we do investments.
In stocks or in what?
Yep.
FDIC insured?
Right, that's not really in our preview. That's not part of this committee's problem, so
So-
sorry.
Okay.
Thanks, yeah, it's,
I guess, well, can't answer this way. It's not like it's a significant amount of interest income that's generated, so.
Dennis, you made a statement that the general fund was 5 million and the utility fund was 2. It's actually reversed.
I'm sorry, I thought I said 5 and 2, so let me clarify that. The utility fund is 5 million, and the general fund is 2 million, and the airport fund is 250,000. If I remember correctly, when that was established in 2018, they had 3 years to try to get to that level. I think they're pretty close. And then they basically broke down a percentage of what was coming from each utility. I thought it was 3, but okay, we can verify that.
It's on your slide. I'm reading from your slide.
3 full budget. Oh, 2 years of, okay. Emergency funds must be replenished. Okay, I was reading the wrong thing. Thank you for that clarification. I was reading the wrong line item incorrectly. There is also a rate stabilization account that was also established by City Council as well. That really was set up to manage any significant changes or increases in wholesale power or water, essentially. And that's the way it is defined. They set a $3 million goal reserve account for that rate stabilization. It sits at about 2.8 million today, so they essentially have met that goal. And again, you can see there, if there was the need to utilize that revenue or that account, money sitting in the account, that would be something that City Council would approve. This slide doesn't really show that much. It really just shows you that, we have 2.3 million debt service annually on the raw water line. If any of you were here, there was some discussion that took place on that yesterday. And with regards to potential refunding opportunities, the City Council had 2 options to choose from. They chose from option 2, which essentially would keep the principal and interest payment approximately the same, but the term of the would be shortened by 4 years. So that's what the financial consultant will be looking at in more detail moving forward. But I thought this committee needed to know that information since it was hot off the press yesterday. So I'm going to make a comment about this slide because really it's a snapshot from a spreadsheet. So the number that you should really hone in on is the cash flow number and the reserve numbers. Otherwise, it just is more confusing than it needs to be. But what we did want to show is basically cash flows from 215 moving forward, and then we got some slides in the future that show some projections with regards to cash flow. In the case of water, You can see where cash flows have been, they started going down. They're actually, because of the rate increases that occurred, those cash flows are more healthy than they have been. And then, of course, the reserve amounts are shown there as well on the operating side through 2020.
On some of these, one of them, the 2019 doesn't match the financial statements from the August 13th.
And that's because this is all more real-time, snapshot in time. They're not, none of these are audited. This is really trying to give us what does actual cash flow look like today? So they won't match.
Well, okay, I'll wait till I get to electric, because, well, this was, you're almost exactly reversed in that we're showing a positive of 565 in the financials, and now we're showing a negative, so it's a pretty big swing for just a month or two after, well, 2 months.
Yeah. So a lot of that depends on capital expenditures, so it can change a lot. So.
Oh, okay, this isn't...
So this is everything. And it's really just trying to get you an idea of overall cash flow, because those transfers in would be a part of this big giant spreadsheet. And again, you'll get to see way more detailed information going forward. What I really wanted to do is just give you an idea what the cash flow looks like today, what the projections look like with our quick and dirty analysis. That's not as detailed as a rate consultant would do, just to get you thinking about what things look like and what they look like moving into the future. So, on the wastewater side, this one I found quite interesting because you can see there that the cash flows are all negative, and they're still negative.
Can we switch to the next slide?
Oh, that would be a good idea. Now you can see how they are. Not knowing and not being able to delve into this significantly, what I think this is really showing is that when the utilities, because remember all the utilities were combined, and so what I think this probably shows, but I'm not certain. And again, we'll have the rate consultant do some different analysis, and is that there was probably, the electric utility probably was subsidizing a portion of the wastewater utility when they were all combined. And as you can see in 2019, it looks quite different. I think a lot of that is because the rates have taken into effect. There hasn't been a lot of money spent on capital. And then we'll look at the projections going forward in a little bit. But on the electric side, again, I think this one is relevant in that there is a significant amount of capital that's being spent, and you can see that that money starts to be expended in 2018, 2019. And so the cash flow, what it tells me, just kind of looking at these numbers, because these are numbers we just calculated, is that the rate increases are doing what they're supposed to do. They're funding those capital projects. The capital projects are starting to, we're starting to spend that money on the capital. And so you can see the cash flow starts to go down through 2020. And then again, here in a little bit, we're going to look at those projections. So.
Excuse me, did you say that the capital projects had their own reserve fund?
They have an emergency reserve. So the capital, each utility, not each capital project, but each utility has a capital reserve tied to it of $5 million in total. And then they're broken down by a percentage for each utility, and I have that number somewhere. But so that's in the event that really is something bad happens. You lose a whole substation, and that money's there to go deal with a significant capital emergency.
Okay.
That's what that's for.
In other documents, there's shown that there is a capital. So you've got something other than an emergency fund. There's a capital project, and it's not, in one of the documents I showed, it wasn't highlighted. It was highlighted separately, but it was a capital project fund, and it looked like it might have been just carrying forward. For instance, there was $5 million as of 2018, if I understood correctly. It was anticipated that $5 million was going to be used in 2019, and evidently it was not, at least at the end of the time frame. So that's some of the things we're trying to understand and track.
Yeah, and I guess I don't have an answer for that because I'm not familiar with what that document is.
It's,
but I don't know if Diane, if that.
There's a cash portion utility fund document that was created in October 2018. It's called cash position.
Okay, well, let us, I don't think we're not going to be able to answer that tonight, obviously.
No, I understand. It's just I was trying to help clarify, because evidently, at least on record or a paper, there seems to be other money, so I just was trying to clarify.
Yeah, well, I hope it would be nice to know there's other money, but not that I'm aware of. Anyway, these are calculations as cash flow, as they said, with the operating reserve and then the $5 million that's sitting there. So landfill stays pretty consistent. There is, just looking at the cash flows, there is generating some revenue there, so that we can in the future deal with some of the capital needs as they arrive. You can see the operating reserve amount. We, by state, NDP requires us to have a landfill closure reserve. That's what that number is.
Excuse me, Dennis, if you'll move forward on the slide as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. I keep doing that. Apologize. So you can see the reserves and the operating reserves, and as I mentioned, the cash flow is going up. That's a good thing. The landfill closure reserve is a landfill closure amount that's required by the state. We do a calculation that they require us to do to calculate what those costs would be. That's the minimum requirement that the state requires. We also have a construction reserve that's included in the customer's fee that's on their bill each year, again, to help with any landfill construction closure issues. And that money essentially sits there for quite a long time. But that's what they require for landfills.
So Dennis, just curious, what's the variability in the landfill closure? It goes from 2.6 to 1.5.
So it was some modifications in actually how they required us to report and calculate. So my understanding was there were modifications, and again, I'm not the expert on this one, but because I did this year's, I'm a new expert. The health district modified the calculation he did to that generated these numbers, so it went down. So that's why it went from 2.8 million. And frankly, when we met with them a couple of months ago on a different issue, they communicated to us that there's probably some other things we can do to actually drop that reserve requirement a little bit more. We just haven't followed up on that because I haven't had time. So it could change. It could actually go down a little bit as well. This is where, again, I really just kind of what we did was we just projected out sales through 2024 and did some really quick back of the napkin calculations, which again, we're going to have a rate study, going to put a lot more time and effort into this, and there's going to be discussions on what you use for projections and what you use for inflation and all these things. All we did was kind of keep a lot of things flat and just see what that did to cash flow given the current capital program, because again, capital drives the cash flow as much as anything, or more than anything, because of the capital project requirements. You can see on the water side, it's interesting in that the cash flows moving forward actually look better than I think we would have anticipated. Now, I caution those numbers only because we haven't done the condition assessment study work, and there's minimal capital improvements on the water side shown through 2024. And remember, these numbers include transfers in still from land sales and solar leases, and they don't include the 2.5% rate increases that were originally projected. So it just gives you an idea of what that fund could look like, at least cash flow wise, given the current conditions with no rate increases. Wastewater, on the other hand, there are some capital projects. It does look better moving forward as far as cash flows. There are a few more capital projects in the later portion of 23, 24 that show that cash flow being negative, but that one's something they think as we move forward and get more detail, we can work that out. Again, there are capital projects that may come out of the condition assessment study that could obviously impact that quite a bit. And we'll get that information for the consultant to build into the rate study. Electric, looking at the cash flows on the electric side, again, there are significant capital projects in the electrical, and here again you can see the cash flow starts to diminish through 2022. It goes negative into 23 and 24. That really is capital project driven, and again, that still includes revenue coming in from land sales and solar leases, and no 2.5% increase. So it just gives you an idea that really at the end of the day, what this whole thing gives you an idea is the capital really is what's driving basically what these funds look like. Again, landfill, pretty straightforward. That cash flow stays about the same. It changes a little bit based on some of the capital projects, but it's pretty consistent day in and day out. And really that's primarily because we have a contract operator, and about the only thing that changes with that contract is some CPI adjustments on their side. And so unless there's something significant that comes up capital project wise, we don't anticipate any real modifications to what's going on with the landfill fund.
I have another stupid question, I apologize, but how did you compute this cash flow number in terms of these other numbers in the column? How's it arrived at?
So are you talking about, so that's what you don't see here, and that's why I want to clarify, is this is a huge spreadsheet that has all the revenues, all the expenses, all the transfers coming in for capital for each year, and then it calculates the cash reserve. And so that's what I'm saying, just be a little cautious when we get to the rate study consultant.
Okay.
You're going to see more than you want, probably. What I'm doing tonight is really just giving you a highlight of what we think is happening in the utility funds. And again, what it tells me is the capital projects really are going to drive what we decide going into the future. I think the rates, in a lot of cases, and then again, this is me reviewing the previous rate study and looking at the capital projects that were in that study, assessing impacts from increases that happen with water sale increases and power purchases and those types of things. But what it really looks like overall is the rates that were increased have essentially done their job. But going into the future, we're going to have to figure that out. Obvious, that's why we're here, and that's why we're all here. And then how we manage the capital program is going to weigh into that heavily.
Well, I understand the rate study in 2016, a big portion of it was also increasing the reserves. And so
they did include the new reserve policies in that rate study. And on the flip side, there were some capital projects that weren't constructed. They weren't necessary. And a perfect example, and I'll go back, I probably should have said it, but in wastewater, which, the projection coming, we actually didn't modify the capital program because because we had discussion with the city council on this, and because we're in the middle of modifying it, there was a $2.5 million expenditure for an effluent pipeline that was in 2023 or 2024, which really probably it was in 2024 because you can see that cash flow go negative real fast. We took that out in this spreadsheet, so those numbers would look worse. But the reality is we do know for a fact we're not going to build an effluent pipeline at this point in time or in the next 4 years. If somebody's going to build it, it's probably not going to be us, and I don't anticipate that we would fund it. So we did take that out of this analysis. If we would have left that in, you can see that would have obviously impacted this pretty significantly.
So Dennis, real quick, on the line where it's talking about the revenues over under expenditures, you commented that much of that is based on existing capital projects that you really haven't looked at in depth, kind of carry over from your predecessor? So
yes and no, to answer your question. So there is some projects that are not as defined specifically in water, where we say we have $500,000 in rehabilitation of pipelines. That I think was added by those before me, knowing that there probably is projects, but at this point in time, frankly, they're undefined. That's what we hope to get out of the condition assessment, is a better defined capital program moving forward that we can put some definition to. So, as an example, we know there's some older sewer in the system that eventually probably needs to be relined, doesn't necessarily need to be replaced. We can program that out. We can put it into the capital plan so that it's more of a programmatic, longer term approach, and doesn't significantly impact rates or revenue requirements substantially. That's where I hope to get when we're done.
So how about in electric?
But in electric, it's much more defined. Okay. It was defined prior to me. We've had some folks review it. I've reviewed it. Others that are smarter than me have reviewed it, and we're still fairly comfortable with that for a lot of reasons. Going forward, there's certainly some things we're going to look at that will impact that with regards to pole replacement programs and some of those things that, again, similar to, I guess to answer your question, the large, significant electric projects that are in the capital plan, I don't anticipate anything like that moving forward that we're unaware of. So the large ones that are there, and we're moving forward with those. the rest of them I see fairly well defined. You know, the 4 to 12 kV is fairly well defined. Where we know we have to do feeder replacements, those are fairly well defined. I really think it's as we get through the assessment process and we develop a reasonable pole replacement program and potentially on top, you know, obviously a transformer replacement, some conductor replacement, stuff like that. Again, we can program that out, and I think something that's more methodical. It depends obviously on the condition of the infrastructure, the age of the infrastructure, and hopefully when we get done with the condition assessment work, that's aligned with a capital plan that makes sense moving forward. But I don't see in any of these right now, whether it be water or wastewater, I'm going to caution myself a little bit on wastewater because I'm guessing ahead, but I don't see a large one-time significant $8 million capital project. I just, you know, we've looked at past reports. Really what I think it is really good asset management and rehab and rehabilitation programs and preventative maintenance moving forward, which is a good thing. I think once we get where we need to be with the electrical system, once we get a good plan in place for the water and system condition assessment, and frankly get caught up to where we need to be, I think moving forward, I don't see any large reservoir replacements. Again, we're going to have a consultant who's going to come in and look at stuff, and but from my experience and my years of business, and I just don't see anything looming that's going to surprise us that we can't manage. So I guess that includes the financial presentation, but again, clearly we're going to have some discussion, and you're going to see way more detail on all of these operating budgets. We can have, as we talk about each utility individually, because in my mind, moving forward, you probably want to hone in on each utility more specifically with more detail, and this is really just to give you a kind of an overall larger view of the entirety of the utilities. There's obviously more work to be done.
I think this is more in the working capital. I want to make sure I don't forget as we go forward, because if I'm understanding in relationship to what you said as far as no surprises going forward, but we evidently had some major surprises in 2018 and 2019, especially for electrical. So we had $9 million in the capital project and $12 million, and I'm pretty positive that wasn't part of this.
No, it was. They just, so
$12 million was part of the rate study?
That was all in the original rate study. Now, did construction costs go up from when that rate study was done, and did they have accurate, you know, construction costs? I can't say one way or another. They certainly have gone up in the last few years, but they were, for the most part, the majority of those projects were embedded in the rate study. Now, my review of that rate study was they were put in years that were impossible to, first of all, generate the revenue necessary to pay for them, because when I say the rate increases didn't go in effect till 2016. So there was no way to move forward with the larger projects as shown in that rate study at the year they were shown in that rate study, because they just couldn't generate the revenue quick enough. And from our perspective, you don't want to go, put money towards that. And the other thing that occurred, by the way, because I keep forgetting this myself, is at the time they did the rate study, a lot of the revenue from the land sales and solar leases was not included in the rate study. So there's a whole bunch of variability when you try to compare the rate study, but the projects themselves are fairly accurate on the electrical side. It's just the date, the year, essentially, from what I can tell.
So is the rate study getting a little bit ahead of the game, but still trying to keep on track with that thought of the aspect of the capital about worrying? Are we going to be able to review some of the historical aspects so we can sort of flow through what to expect, because I still think that the last 3 years of capital is a big issue.
It certainly is a significant impact to the funds because we've started to spend that capital. So, yeah, what they'll do is then, and obviously we'll give them a copy of the previous rate study. They'll do a lot better job than I've done here. This was staff's, me, essentially doing a quick and dirty, what does it look like? They will go back in time. They will better able to find what portion of the revenue was generated from the rate increase versus, and be able to kind of separate that out from land sale revenue and define that for you in a better picture and better graphs and better pie charts. But yes, yeah, they will do that.
Okay, thank you.
They typically ask for, at a minimum, a year going back, billing data. We're going to go back farther than that with billing data just because we'll go back to when the rates changed to the best that we can because we changed billing systems. And so, as from a bill tab perspective and doing the cost of service work, we'll get the best data we can. Obviously, we have better data on the capital project expenditures. And so they'll have all of that information. So yes, you'll see that.
So if that was the final part of the presentation for the utilities, finances, then we can go on to the summary. Now, I guess, do I have the authority to discuss the length of the meeting?
Are you suggesting that it's too long?
Well, it's 7:30 and we're only into number 3.
I don't. That's probably the longest part of the meeting, so we can move right along. If that's what you're trying to encourage me to do.
I'm just trying to be polite to everybody.
No, I appreciate that. That in my mind, that is that really was just to give a high level. What do things look like today? What do they look like into the future, based on minimal data management, given the current capital improvement plan and everything else being kind of is what it is. So So yeah, we're good to move forward, and I'll speed it up.
Forward.
I will speed it up. I know I'm the one that slowed that one down. So.
You're on the next several agendas. So I guess if I can let you, I'll just let you go on and this got the summary discussion. The next 3, actually the next 4 are on your, so if you want to just keep going.
Okay, we'll go on with item number 3. And really this is the summary that you asked for to the, and we don't have it as a presentation, but in your package is that those capital projects, and I know the gentleman that commented would like more data, and eventually we can get that data. That was us doing the best we could to go back in time and get that information that you have in your hands today. Hopefully it at a minimum gives you a good idea of those projects. I know we don't have all the details, and frankly, moving forward, we do have a CIP coordinator that will be in Public Works, whose job is to track these, the dates, the budgeted versus actual, all of those things. And moving forward, hopefully we'll be able to get that data easier. Right now, we have to go back into the system for each project, get dates, get the times associated with them. It's just a really time-consuming, difficult process. So that product that you see in front of you is what we could provide given the time we had. So if there's any questions with regards to the actual projects, most of them were before my time, but I did twist somebody's arm here today that can maybe answer some of those.
So during the public comment, there were calculations about the budget versus the amount spent. And so I just want to use one example for my own clarification. There's a whole bunch listed on page 1 that say BC TAP. I don't know if you can put that on the screen or not.
No, we don't have that on the
Okay,
screen.
but it
yes.
repeats the 2.777 million multiple times. It looks like it does it 7 different times. But if I look at what's spent, it looks like those are all related to 2.7 million in total. So is that
Right, and
is that
that's where
potentially an error in terms of repeating?
No.
No?
So
Okay.
what this is in this case, and it could be for other cases, in this case is the project's been broken down into different parts and pieces for various reasons. In an example is the easy one that everybody loves to talk about is the transformer itself that was purchased separately, but it's still a part of the overall project. So where it is defined as BC TAP transformer, in general, the majority of those projects are all the same project, but they're phased, or there was equipment purchased separately because it was more efficient. But they are all one big project. So, what I would like to see moving into the future is when we would report this, you would report it as a single project, and underneath that would be all these different expenditures, even
let me
though they're
clarify
done
really
separately.
quick. Yeah, so you said they're all one big project. Is the total
2.77
budgeted 2.7,
million.
but we repeated the 2.7 in each of the different line
As
items?
the budget amount, because they broke down the project as a whole, and I don't have all the details in that, and maybe Jim does, but it's just essentially it's the way they purchased they purchased in a lot of different cases equipment separately because it made more sense to do it. Or an example right now, we just awarded some above grade structural construction because that's a different type of construction. So that's the way it looks like it does. Normally, if we kept this really simple, there would be a BC TAP transformer and breaker project, 69 kV project, and we would total these up and you wouldn't see this detail.
Yeah, so
unless you really wanted it.
So what I'm thinking is the case, if you go back to the public comment, that there was 40 million budgeted and 14 million spent. That's an example in the budgeted column where it was overstated because the 2.7 million was listed 7 different times.
Yeah, no, and there's no, it's not $14 million. So,
Yeah, okay, thanks.
no, that's a really good point. And again, it's a lot of it is just going into the financial system and digging out those details. And I think you're right. We could have portrayed this better, but the way we kind of managed this is when it was time to get it done, we got it done and at least got to you an idea of the projects that have been budgeted, projects that have been put on hold, and the projects that have been complete. And I will say, just to give staff some kudos, is these are just the utility projects. And so, if you look at it in whole, at least from my perspective, you can double this with all the general fund projects, and that's what the city engineer, who's sitting back there, is engaged to do. So it's a lot of heavy lifting, but it's not insignificant, obviously. And frankly, when we do these this way, in a lot of cases, it might be cheaper overall, but it creates more work for him. So. Because you have to put those packages out separately. So when you're bidding them and complying with Nevada purchasing law. So.
And then one other question. For the ones that are complete, where there's not any dollars in the spent column, is there an explanation on that?
So I don't have those explanations. I think what really happened is they had the ability to do them within, in certain cases, in some of the smaller ones. It's something they had to get to from an operating perspective. and they went and got the smaller ones done out of their operating funds just because they rose up in priority. But to really answer your question, that's something we'd have to dig into deeper. I don't know for a fact.
So maybe one other comment. I'm just throwing a few out there just to get a sense. There's one, for example, on the date is July 29th, and it showed a water service replacement, and it says Lake Mountain. So if these were numbered electronically, it's page 56, but I don't see anything on the actual. It looks like it's the last page of that table. And near the bottom, so it's the second to the last one, it says that the budgeted amount was $400,000, but it was completed for $9,000.
That's correct. So this is a really good example of resources. So that's basically ones they had to react to because they had leaks. And the fact of the matter is, with the amount of work that the city engineer has going on and our own operations staff, those ones we don't like to push out, but when we don't have the resources, we will. We also are looking at, where we have to, we'll contract those out in order to get that work done.
So just to drive this example a little bit deeper, if you go up 4 line items above that, there's a very similar entry for the exact same dollar amount, and that one's saying ongoing, and the description's fairly similar too. So just maybe some cleansing opportunities there on the data.
Yep, and this is what I would consider a. Oh, well, you're the one that asked for it.
The $400,000 is the total physical amount for copper water line replacements. The items and number and amounts on the right-hand column is what we've spent out of that $400,000 to replace that one water line or water line set. That's out of the $400,000 budget, which is in the budget for the year.
Right.
So that's how that's done. So basically what it should be is an ongoing single line item of $400,000 with deductions of every service that has been fixed or replaced out of that budget.
Right.
Until that budget's exhausted.
And to add a little more additional information, what we're doing with that now is defining those projects individually, putting them in one package, bidding that package out, and getting that work done.
And what's happening for the layperson or the person that isn't really understanding this copper service replacement is from the main pipe out in the street to the residents. So anybody that wonders where their money's going to for their water fee monthly, that's what it costs to redo one water service to a residence.
Yep. So you're essentially, tearing up pavement. You're replacing that. You're taking it down the main line. You're putting in a new corp stop most of the time. So it's not cheap. Unfortunately, this is an item that all water agencies deal with on a regular basis. I hate to refer back to my days in Henderson, but I always had a operations manager who always wanted more staff to get this work done, and it was just an ongoing maintenance issue. And unfortunately, in our environment, if we don't react to those types of projects, and you have water going down the street, in the world we live in today, that's just not acceptable. So we've got to get those done in a timely manner. Obviously, water waste is something we try to avoid. So. But this is work we can continue to put more effort in and get more dates and more detail. This is essentially what we started with and we're able to deliver in time for this meeting.
Okay, yeah, because it's a little confusing sometimes on the agenda items, because this one blends in with, I guess, the last aspect, because in the package you talked about the working capital. Not the capital projects. And then, so as this, the duty of this committee is to work with the capital improvement projects. I believe we have the ongoing aspect as well as the future. Am I understanding that correctly?
Right, and I think if you're open to, if you want to have this discussion as part of item 6 with regards to the capital improvement program and future meetings, I think that would be good.
That's fine. So I think, but to go along with Kevin, if I understand correctly, to answer the, Keith, sorry. Sorry. To answer Frank's, Fred, names. To answer his question, I think, as far as where do we stand, we'll answer that in number 6 too, because that will be, I think, going further. We need more data. We need to work with.
And there are items that he suggested that may be a lot different from what staff anticipate and what we think the goals and duties of this committee are. So we'll get to that. We'll get to it real fast, actually.
Okay, that's what I think that was the biggest thing.
Right.
Is just where do we stand, and so we'll do a little more at the end, but there isn't a whole lot we can say right now.
No, and again, there is a significant amount of work to be done still, and I'd love to the extent that I can, we're going to throw it on the rate consultant. Obviously, we still are the ones that get the data for them, so we have to do that work anyway. But
and Greg, I think you've had in the past some questions. I guess I'll be at 6 also. Are you good? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'll push that off to the end. Then we'll get through. The basic thing, I think what we ought to do is the next item, which is the basic water service charge, which a lot of people have asked about, and this is a breakdown in the next item that Dennis can give us.
okay, so we'll move forward. Thank you for that. Item 4 is a discussion regarding the basic water service charge. In the package, and I'm going to show one slide and one slide only, so you should be happy about that. And we'll just talk about that. And I'm going to cover just a little bit of history. And Larry has encouraged me to speed up, but I think that a little bit of the history is important. In the package is a presentation that the Water Authority did back, I believe, in 2016. I might have that date wrong, but basically laying out what the purpose of those surcharges are that you see there. But if you go back further in time, and this will take just a few minutes, because I think it's good for everybody to know. If you go back further in time, when the city joined the Southern Nevada Water Authority with the rest of the agencies that joined the Southern Nevada Water Authority, those other cities in the valley were obviously expanding and growing, and there were major capital needs to generate the revenue for those projects specifically, which were millions and millions, billions of dollars. The city of Boulder City at the time, and this is going back to early 1990, not 1900, sorry. They wouldn't have benefited necessarily from those in-valley facilities, and they already had capacity. And Greg Todd asked the question, how much capacity we have? Well, we have about 19 million gallons a day. So the city of Boulder City at the time said, well, we don't grow, we have capacity, and there's really no need for us to participate in those construction programs and pay the same reliability surcharge, the commodity surcharge, a lot of those things that were really for those capital projects. Then the world changed moving forward, and lake levels started to drop, and that's where you see things that happen that have changed, what's going on with the charges from the Southern Nevada Water Authority. First, and not least, is the city requested a raw water pipeline, which we know we have the debt service on. It's not just a pipeline. When the Boulder City asked for that, the construction of the intake 2 and the pump stations at the time were already planned and in construction. So it also included not only the pipeline, but a percentage buy-in to those raw water facilities that Boulder City originally never intended to take advantage of. So it's more than a pipeline, and I just think it's important that people know that, because you had to have raw water pumping facilities, the intake 2, which is raw water, the facilities that pump the raw water from Lake Mead to the River Mountain Water Treatment Plant, and then the pipeline to bring it back around to Boulder City. So that's what that $15, at the end of the day, that and intake 3, because clearly the drought was doing what it's doing with lake levels in Lake Mead. And so Boulder City, rightfully, I believe, engaged themselves with the Water Authority, and that's where those charges come from. That's the same charges that the other purveyor members pay for those facilities, specifically, mostly with regards to intake 3. And so that's so that's that $15.80 per month. We include that, we embed that into the service charge. The Water District, City of Henderson, and I believe North Las Vegas, but I would have to verify that, show it as a separate line item on their bill. My calculation here, just to make sure everybody's clear, 90% of our meters are less than 1 inch in our residential. That was just my quick and dirty calculation of taking our total customer accounts based and dividing it by essentially about $1 million a month that we pay the Water Authority. So what I'm telling you is that for a 1 inch meter, that might be a little less than 1580, but for a 2 inch, it's going to be a little more than 1580. But in general, that's what that looks like.
Now, yeah, can we put it back up? So I'll make sure I'm understanding correctly. So what you just said relates to 37, not just the 15.
It's embedded in the 37, so it totals up to the 37.
So but I guess so the Southern Nevada Water Authority, are all 3 of those charges
No.
part of theirs?
So just the 1580.
Because you were talking about the raw water line.
Well, and that, because that was slightly different, because it's raw water debt service, and everybody says raw water line, but all I'm trying to communicate is it was more than just a raw water line. There was also the cost to buy into the raw water system that was already being constructed, because Boulder City originally was not participating in that.
Okay, I caught that. I guess what I'm trying to get at is the next 2 lines.
So the next, I'm not going to go through those. So
okay, because okay, so then that's the 8. There's part of the raw line.
So the raw water line is not a part of the 1580.
Okay, so when you explained the raw water line more than that, that's what confused me when you have the item down below.
It is confusing, and that's why, there's a lot of backup and detail to that. But in general, the raw water line was the pipeline, but it also included a component of the buy-in into the raw water system. That $32 million, plus or minus, whatever it was. So that's, again, that is the debt. That's embedded in that debt service. But the SNWA drought infrastructure charge includes much more than that, with intake 3 and components of intake 2.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to make sure I understand. So isn't the 1580 though? That's an ongoing.
That is ongoing forever.
Forever. Whereas the 8
for a long time.
Where the raw $32 million, I thought the $32 million was related to the raw water, and that will go away.
That will go away. So let me get through this,
okay,
and we'll handle this. So all I'm really doing is giving history on that surcharge. So the easiest way to explain it to people is really that it's most significantly, it's intake 3 and the pump station for intake 3. But there is a small component on top of that. The administrative charge is the administrative charge that we showed earlier on to the water utility. So that's that's the one charge we generate for each utility. That's a little over $1 million. Again, I just took it in general over the customer base, it's around $13.09, but it obviously is a little different. It would be a little different based on the meter size. Raw water debt service, this one is very much an estimate because when the previous rate study was done, they didn't really define where it went. So just in discussion with the finance director and looking at the proportion of expenses that went onto the basic service charge and the commodity, they were just all combined. So really, this is just taking the difference between 3756 and minus the 1309 minus the 1580 and saying around $9 is attributed to the raw water debt service charge, and the remainder is being covered by the commodity. This is Dennis Porter's method of estimating what that is because, again, they combined them all, so we don't know for certain exactly what was on the commodity and what was in the raw water service charge. Nonetheless, it's an estimate of what we think is included in that raw water service charge. It's close.
So again, as we've talked about tonight, more of the details will be brought out during the rate study analysis. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. And then you know it really goes down to, you know, because there are a lot of moving parts. Yesterday we talked about refunding for the raw water debt service charge. I'm just showing what our best calculated guess is for the proportion of the raw water debt charge that's covered by the basic water service charge. The remainder, frankly, is we know that the quarter-cent sales tax revenue right now we're applying towards the debt service. So, and that's important as well. So approximately between $850,000 a year that we get from the quarter-cent sales tax goes directly to the debt service, but it doesn't cover it all. So there's another 1.3 million plus that's not covered by that quarter sales tax. It's either covered by a portion of the basic service charge and part of the commodity charge. But yes, those calculations would be something we would look at moving forward. And they're estimates on our part.
I just have a sort of comment from the perspective of a user. It would make more sense to say, well, here are the items, they add up, and that defines the number that you are finally charged. We seem to be doing it the other way around. We're saying we know exactly how much you're charging, but we don't know what the items.
And again, because we're not doing any of the math or calculations related to the total revenue requirements and what portion is the commodity and what portion is the basic water service charge. And again, when the previous rate study was done, they didn't define that exactly. They just took the revenue requirements and they proportioned out what looks like, you know, a certain proportion went to the basic water service charge. But we know the Water Authority was a part of that, and we know the administrative charge is a part of that. The rest of that, you could say all that debt service minus the quarter-cent sales tax is being generated through the commodity, or it's being generated through the debt service. Either one. What I chose to do here is showing if we were going to do something different with that debt service or refund it, that number could change. It could go down. It could stay the same if you're just going to refund and shorten the time frame, but then it would go away at the end of the term of the new refunding. Or the commodity, or the rate on the commodity could go down. Those are the options that the rate consultant can look at. But in general, you can guess that number is about what it is.
Okay. Good.
So, no, I don't know what else is on that slide. So that's pretty much it. Again, those are, give you an idea as we move forward, that'll be better defined. The rate consultant still will have to, estimate which part's covered by commodity and which part's covered by the debt service. It looks like, looking at the rate study, it was 30% at around there was meter service charge, and or 40%, and the remainder was in the commodity, but it's really difficult to tell.
Dennis, on last night's meeting, which I attended, the raw water debt service, the repayment of that debt is strictly driven by our water commodity. It's not on a property tax bill, it's not electric, it's strictly water. So the water is driving the repayment of that bond.
That is correct.
And then last night we discussed, and there was an error made, that there was $750,000 a year in reserve that we had to take and pay off some of this, and then you would enlighten me tonight that that's an erroneous number.
Well, because it caught me a little bit off guard too, because I always like to know when I have $750,000 sitting around. But
a year.
What was really being referred to, I think, was somewhat confusing, is that when the ballot question was created, there was arguments for, arguments against, and I'm going to see if I can find it specifically. There was an example given that basically said, well, you could, if you decided to utilize the solar lease revenue. It gave an example of if you redirected $750,000 a year towards the debt, you could significantly reduce the time frame, and then there would be savings in paying it off. But it didn't put any money in a specific fund. It was an example used in the arguments for or against passage. So with regards to that ballot question one, so there was no direction to go put money in a certain account. It just said you could use it towards debt service.
Question, just spitballing. You have solar farms down there that are required to have fire sprinklers in the building, okay? And they're running 14-inch water lines to each individual solar farm to have the capacity to run fire sprinklers off of the quote-unquote, on paper, exhausted 14-inch line that was put in many years ago, because I was there when it was put in. Can we take and surcharge for live fire lines to the solar farm to offset some of this raw water debt service? Can it be linked? Because raw water debt service versus potable debt service, that's where we're putting this raw water debt service on, as the basic water service charge, which is potable water, not what we call raw water, which is untreated, unfiltered, unprocessed.
So I don't know the answer to that, and the reason I would have to study each of those contracts individually to see how they were defined. It's something we can look at. If they're contractually it's set, then maybe not. The reality with regards to those facilities down there is, once they're constructed, they use, they certainly have a contractual, allocation, if you will. But their actual usage is much less than that. Especially once the projects are completed, it's to wash solar panels, and it's to dust control on the roads. And so they don't use a lot of water. It would be tricky because we don't have a separate charge for independent fire service lines at this point in time. Some utilities do that. If you're going to do that, are you going to be consistent across the board with your commercial customers? And it's just something that had to be studied.
Well, the reason I'm asking, because I'm pretty much into the electric and water and different commodities. And one project I know that's going on right now is the requirement of all of the hangars at the airport to have sprinklers in them. Mm-hmm. So now the problem comes up with when we start tapping our potable water system to put fire sprinklers in an airplane hangar. That is not a good use of domestic water standby. Raw water will do the same thing. It'll put out the fire. I don't know in any book that states we have to use potable water for fire protection. Well, I've used personally industrial water for fire protection. So we need to start looking at that, otherwise we're going to overtax our domestic potable water system by all the preordained taps or services that we're going to be putting in within the next 5 years, we'll say.
Yeah, so we would have to look at that a little more to give a little bit of feedback on that. When we look at those demands from a hydraulic modeling perspective, we look at the maximum day demand plus fire to make sure we're not adversely impacting the system, because the fires, obviously it's not an ongoing demand that happens all the time. So it really is, are you impacting the pressure in different parts of the system when you have middle of the summer and you have a fire? So we can look at those impacts just through the modeling, both whether it's potable or even whether you decided to put it on the raw water system. And we have models for both of those in place now, so that would be something that could be looked at.
So on that topic, though, what I was hearing, besides just the demand on the system, is that there's different economic value between the two types of water. So the more that we would use the raw for applications where it can be used, the better.
Right. So the best example I can give for that right now is we just ran the hydraulics on converting the Boulder City municipal course from potable to raw. From the golf course's perspective and the general fund's perspective, obviously that's better for them because raw is about 30% cheaper because it doesn't have to be treated. We pay the Southern Nevada Water Authority a wholesale delivery charge, and then what it takes for us to do some of the operation and maintenance on top of that. It's a smaller system compared to the distribution system for potable, but it does make sense to make that conversion. It's a better use of the raw water versus putting potable water on the golf course. The golf course does have a capital program to renovate the entire irrigation system, so the time to do it is when they do that renovation, which is scheduled to start this year. And that's a big number. That golf course in a max day uses around 1 million gallons a day, so we'll be able to take a significant load off of the potable system and put it on the raw water system.
Any other comments? Go ahead. Go ahead, George.
So that's about 40% of our total water usage or something?
No.
1 million gallons a day?
The 1 million gallons a day is, so we use approximately 10 million gallons a day in the summer on the raw water system. So we would reduce that by, 10%. We would increase that by 10% essentially and use 11 million gallons a day, and then the potable would go down the same. So, yeah, it basically extends the capacity of the potable side that we get from SNWA, which is the 19 million gallons a day on the potable system. So,
I believe we had two aspects to this agenda item. One was, as Greg had said, that the public has brought up the base charge, and we're trying to figure out, I guess, how we can help with that. And then also just you were trying to give us a better breakdown.
Just give you the breakdown. Again, they got moving parts here. What I would suggest at this point in time is we know there's ongoing work with the refunding. I think we've given you some information to think about, and what I would suggest is we have time to get the rate study consultant going and looking at that in more detail. The financial consultant, again, is digging into the detail on the refunding. So we can kind of keep it open as a agenda item that can be discussed. I don't think anything needs to be done tonight because there's still some work to be done. It just gives you an idea of what that meter service charge looks like, and if you were to either redirect revenues to help pay down that debt in addition to refunding. I guess that's an option that could be considered. It really comes down to some philosophy and some discussion, and the rate consultant, I think, can help guide some of that discussion with regards to the purity of an enterprise fund versus, utilizing these other funds that we happen to have the opportunity in Boulder City to take advantage of, that go into a capital improvement fund that can be used for anything. And then it turns into a larger discussion of priorities with regard to what that revenue gets utilized for. So, it's easy to hone in on what you could or couldn't do potentially with the basic water service charge and the raw water debt service charge. But it does turn into a larger philosophical discussion. And I think as we move forward and have discussions with the rate consultant, they can help with that. And it could be some of those discussions move up to the based on what we learn. Maybe there's a recommendation that doesn't define exactly what it does, but maybe there is consideration to do one thing or another. Because again, the difficulty I think we have as the Utility Advisory Committee, me being we as a non-voting member, you guys got the difficulty of being the voting members, is it's easy to contemplate and discuss solely as it relates to the water utility. But obviously those funds can be used for other things as well. And so then it becomes a bigger issue on what's the best use for solar lease revenue and land sale revenue. So that just complicates it further, is I think what I just said. But
I think one of the things was that whether the city was currently looking at the base charges themselves, or if this committee should be looking at a recommendation. But I think if I'm understanding correctly, we need pretty much everything tonight almost relates to the rate study, and we need to wait for more information on what they have. So maybe what we want to do is, instead of leaving the base charge on, see if the committee, we put a rate study item on the agenda,
right,
and we keep that on there. And I think if we say the rate study, we should be able to talk about the base charge. Wouldn't that be correct?
Yeah, which is a really good lead into 5 and 6.
Correct. But I'm just trying to make sure, since we're at base charge, whether we want to leave it on the agenda or can we just look.
Yeah, I would agree that it's an issue with regards to rates overall. So I don't know that it needs to be a separate item independently. I think there's going to be enough discussion. And I've got some thoughts with regards to 6, and I know this committee has probably more thoughts maybe even than I do, and so we can flesh that out a little bit more moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
So I just wanted to give you a quick update on the status of the rate study and the consultant selection process, and I'm going to really answer the gentleman in the audience's question in some respects first. Staff never contemplated, frankly, that this committee would be a part of a consultant selection process, and nor would I really recommend that myself. We put those RFPs out. Let me dig those out real fast. We put those, and when I say we put those RFPs out, we developed basic scope of services. We work with our purchasing manager who makes sure we comply with all the purchasing rules, and we appropriately move through the selection, consultant selection process as staff. So we advertised the utility rate study in June 28th, 2019. We advertised the water and sewer system evaluation. I'm going to talk about electric separately from these two. On June 25th, proposals for both of those were submitted to staff in the week of basically July 24th for the water and sewer condition assessment, July 25th for the rate study consultant. The six proposals we received from the rate study were Avant Energy, Eccentricity LLP, FCS Group, Newgen Strategies, Raftalis, and Wildan Financial Services. Staff reviewed and rated those proposals. We've been working with the purchasing manager on basically getting the scope detailed and finalized and the contracts completed to go to council, if for no other reason to make sure we expedite the process. With regards to the consultant selection for the rate study, the top scoring consultant was Raftalis. We've been having discussions with them on the contract and the scope of work, as well as the costs for that work. With our desire to get that through council as quick as possible, which would, this case at best, would be September 24th council meeting, so that they can get moving. So that's where that is. On the water and sewer system evaluation, similar. We got 4 proposals, which was a little surprising to me. I thought we would get more because we cast a very wide net to a lot of different firms. We got proposals from Project Engineering Consultants, Horrocks Engineers, GC Wallace, and Brown and Caldwell. And in that analysis and scoring of those proposals, Brown and Caldwell was the preferred selected consultant. That process is moving forward as we speak. There's way more work to be done on it. I doubt it can make the September 24th meeting, just because that scope is a little more difficult to define and to negotiate. And so that gives you an idea where those are. My hope would be that we would still be able to move forward with the contract for the rate consultant on the 24th city council meeting, and then hopefully the following meeting after that with the condition assessment. With regards to the electrical condition assessment, it was a desire of ours we have a lot of data, we have a lot of information on the electrical system. We are going to pilot test a small contract with some drone analysis, in which they can use thermal imaging, do pole integrity testing, and basically using drone technology more efficiently and quickly than we can, climbing every pole and doing an assessment on every pole. And so we're going to test that first, and then with that data, try to develop that condition assessment capital improvement program in-house. So that's where that is.
Won't the results of those affect the rate study?
Yes. So, and they will. What I see happening with this group is, and I'm going to go back to council's. Council approved an item, a resolution that was put forth to delay the 2.5% until January. I think it's going to be very difficult for us, even going as quick as we can at the rate we're going today, to get all that information to the rate study consultant, because they'll be able to get everything they need, obviously, prior to the end of the year, but I doubt we're going to get them the ability to finalize those capital programs until closer to spring. So what I see is not doing anything with rates, but that's going to be up to council. Until we finish that work, we build it into the budget, and if there's something that has to be done, it's done July 1st through the budget process. I think even that is fast.
Does anything have to be put into the contract for the rate study to wait for the final assessment being done?
We've given them a general time frame on which we want this done. They understand that. They also understand some of that's going to be waiting on that information, but realistically, once they have their model built, that part's not that hard. It really is pretty simple to put the capital projects in. It may take some discussion on how they balance the projects during a certain time frame, because we'll probably look at 10 years. If what we do with rates would be a shorter time frame than that, but we would want them to go out further with regards to doing the best we can on capital projects, just so we know going out in the future. Again, is there anything significant that we're not aware of? In 10 years there might be, we just need to know. That doesn't mean it'll affect rates immediately or at all. But they'll look at it. Their analysis will be 10 years at a minimum. Typically what you look at is, for what's solid, is the 5-year program.
Okay. And then on the other two assessments, in the rate analysis, it clearly includes the utility committee in the process and in what they're involved with.
Yes.
Neither assessment, well, the assessment with the city, we don't quite know about, and the assessment in the sewer has nothing stating with the committee.
We will give him updates on what's going on with those studies for the sole reason that they comport to what's going to go into that rate study. So as we gather information, as we learn what's going on in both those studies, as we make progress, we'll report that back to the committee. And we can have them come in and give briefings themselves or updates. Once we jump into item 6, I can talk about a thought I had sooner rather than later about a next meeting and something that could occur with this group. But I'm moving forward into the next item. So, and I don't know if I think I said with regards to the review of the proposals for the water and sewer condition assessment, Brown and Caldwell was scored the highest. And the reality is there's a lot of qualified firms here. That's a good thing. So, but that's how staff went through that process. We did work directly with the purchasing manager to make sure we complied with all the NRS 332, 338, those things that we're required to do as we select and go through qualified or qualification-based selection processes, because we do have to comply with state law.
Does anybody else have any comments? Okay, I guess then let's, so if that's, then we are ready for number 6, I guess.
Yep, and I will try to go fast, but it's probably going to take a little bit of time.
Maybe one last question on that. Are these evaluations public? Are they available? Or like how you arrived at that conclusion, who you selected?
I indicated who we selected. They've been, they were notified, and I don't remember the actual dates. We can ask Paul if you want the actual dates. There is a protest period. So the consultants who were not selected can protest if they choose to do that. We didn't have any protests, so we've been moving forward with that.
No, but my point is
negotiation process.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but you did a review of like 4 companies and you had these criteria. Mm-hmm. And are there documents that document that? Like, okay, here's what we thought, how we rated them on each of these criteria.
The actual scoring documents.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, those are, Yeah, they're available through the purchasing manager.
They are, okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So really quick on that topic, if I understood correctly, I can't remember which RFP it was, but it looked like price was like 10% of the factor.
So this was a fun one because we did put price in the, we didn't really want price so much as we wanted to see their hourly rates. We got whacked upside the head. That's a technical term by the Board of Professional Engineers and Registered Engineers and Land Surveyors because in complying with the NRS, we're not allowed to do that. So we got a letter from them that said you can't do that, and we basically took that out and redacted that portion from the proposal process. And since it only accounted for 10%, it didn't really impact anything. But state law, just so everybody does know, when you go through a qualification-based selection process with these types of consulting services, you're not allowed to look at price. From my perspective, that's actually been a good thing. That way you're ensured that you do your selection based on the best qualifications and you don't let price sway you in any way. But that's just my opinion, having done this for so many years. What I will tell you is knowing a lot of these firms, they're all about the same. Typically, from an hourly rate perspective, they don't change much. Really, where where it comes into is that we do a good negotiation. We have a well-defined scope. We provide some leeway, knowing the perfect example I'll give is on the rate consultant. We know that things could happen during this process, so I intentionally have added some supplemental service funding in there so that if something comes up that's outside the normal scope, we can address it. But that was at my request, not theirs. If there's 5 more utility committee meetings than we anticipate, then we can, pay them for that.
So just to clarify, I definitely heard you say that the fee structure is very similar, but at the end of the day, the price, the cost wasn't even a factor. It's
Right.
a 0% factor.
Right, and I will tell you that, we had a good idea coming into what we think this rate study is. There's enough information out there given, a rate study, scope of services don't change that much. That's different on the condition assessment side because there's a lot of stuff you don't know till you get out there and start analyzing it. So you can get pretty detailed and pretty specific, and you have a good idea on the hours it's going to take to manage and complete each task. The condition assessment is a little fuzzier, and you just do the best you can during negotiation. You work as project managers to get the best product that we can, given the budget we have. So,
If I was reading the RFP correctly, part of the proposal was to present how they would do each step or phase. Mm-hmm. And one of them was how they plan to interact with the committee.
And yes, and frankly, that was probably, and I can't remember who the number 2 firm was based on the scoring, but that's where the top 2 firms really probably separated themselves from the other firms, although they all realized, because we told them in the scope, they were going to have to interact. The top 2 firms had done a lot of utility advisory committee presentation work, and or at least they portrayed it in their proposal. It doesn't mean the other ones didn't, because they probably have too, but they just did a better job of portraying that. So that was one of the factors that made somewhat of a difference in that selection process.
I guess what I was also getting at was that if I understand correctly, the way it's written, that it's public, or at least it's city property. So is that something the committee can see, the proposal of the selected candidate? So we'd have a little bit of heads up to know what their thoughts are?
Yes. In fact, and again, one of my thoughts I had with item 6, we can talk about in addition to that.
Okay, thank you.
So, are we ready to move on to 6?
Yep.
So, discussion on future meetings and related tasks. I think I'll just jump into this if you don't mind, Chairman. And I'll start out with the easy one, which is if the first Wednesday in each month is a good date, then we can certainly move forward. That is, right now, looking at the calendar, that is probably the best date, with city council meetings, workshops, the planning commission meetings, historic preservation, the airport commission. It's a pretty full schedule, and that day sticks out as being the best consistently moving forward. So that would be my recommendation as the ex officio utility guy.
And since this has no proposed action next to it, then I guess there is no vote. It's just a matter as long as nobody has a problem with it, then we just go forward. Is that how we do it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So I guess just being the chair, is there a problem with that for anybody, the first of the month? Understanding that people already have commitments set up especially probably for this calendar year. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's we'll move forward that way.
So really quick, just on that one, I support it, but I heard a couple of others, I think including potentially the email that you talked about previously, that Ned won't be there. Eileen, you're not going to be there next month, or the month thereafter. I'm not going to be available next month either. So it'll be a pretty small group next month.
It'll be a small group, and we're open. There is the ability. I know that this would be asking probably way too much, but if it's a matter of the potential for calling in, that's something we can certainly do. But the reality is we need 4 for a quorum. So we should be good there, given what I heard. We'll still, obviously, everybody will get the same packages, regardless of whether you're going to be here or not. And so, given that, it sounds like that date's okay.
Can the committee send something? Can they individually send it to me, or can they send it to the city as if they have comments that they'd like read? Is that any way somebody can do that?
Comments with regard to
the agenda.
We don't have an agenda set up for the next meeting.
But
You'll have something sent to you.
I think what he's asking is if you have the package and you have a question or a comment, can you submit that prior to the meeting? Is that what you're asking?
Correct.
Yeah, and I think if it's just a question, just like any other question that you're comfortable with asking staff, they can send them directly to me.
Okay.
If it's something that we think is really relevant and the rest of the committee we'll bring it, we can, because there's oftentimes it's just a question about what is this? And I don't see any reason for in any open meeting law violation, if it's just that you're asking for some information or asking a question, you can ask that question, you can send it to us. We can send out an answer and response to everybody. We're not taking action on anything. It's purely informational. And I can see that happening a lot.
If we're missing that many people, it's just something to think about. If people think about it, it could be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And again, if we were concerned that that question might lead to something that required an action item, we could prefer to handle it separately or differently or include it in a future agenda for discussion.
Well, that's the one thing that, whether we talk about it now or before the end, is two things that are a little, as I stumbled in the beginning is I guess we do need to understand where we put a proposed or possible action. So it seems like it's a little bit hampering for us, or
Right.
for me.
And, I see many meetings that's a lot of information going to you with questions back to staff before there's action items. And that's not unusual at all.
No, and I agree with that. It's just a matter of motions and stuff like that. It looks
Sure.
like we're hampered without that clause.
Yeah.
And so that it's a little just,
Typically, in these meetings with utility advisory committees, while in our desire to obviously comply with open meeting law, a lot of these things start to almost self-generate what these recommendations would look like. Out a little further in time, they become a little more obvious to the group as what they'd be, and then you could start. As a committee, as long as the agenda item is posted and properly stated as some sort of action item, or even a direction to staff we have an idea, we'd like to formulate a recommendation, have staff draft it, and then we could put it on the agenda at your request. So there's some options there that keep us in compliance with the open meeting law, because again, as you get information and stuff gets more defined, I anticipate those recommendations for the committee will be a little more obvious, depending on what they are. We're going to be this committee's, we hone in on rates because that's typically what happens with these, but we're going to be looking at integrated resource plans for the electrical system. We're going to be looking at the capital improvement plans. We're going to be reviewing water conservation plans. Those are the things that are defined in the resolution that are what this committee's been conditioned to do. The schedule itself gets a little more complicated. We obviously want to make progress because we are trying to come to a resolution at a certain point in time because council chose to delay a rate increase, and we're tasked with dealing with that. So that's certainly not lost on me or I think any of you, but there's also other functions the committee's engaged to review and make recommendations to, and that's going to come down to more of the meeting management and things staff needs to start developing and working on.
I have one concern. I don't know if this is the right place to discuss it, but it seems to me the way to be transparent about what we're doing, given what we now know about the open meeting law, would be to discuss the agenda of the following meeting at the previous meeting. So I requested at this meeting that we put on the agenda a discussion of the agenda for next month's meeting, but that request was ignored for some reason, and I'm not sure why.
I feel pretty comfortable that the staff report allows us to do that. The way we wrote the staff report for this item had discussion on future agendas and meetings and what could be included in those meetings. It was broad,
Okay.
but and I'll just jump in. I guess we're on this task, so.
Well, just to be clear, because the mayor told us, he's here, he said we should put that as an agenda item if we want to discuss the next meeting's agenda, that should be. So why not do that then?
Yeah, no, I'm not suggesting we can't.
So can we put that on the next meeting to discuss the next meeting's agenda? In other words, have that on every meeting agenda to discuss?
Yes, you can have the future agenda on, and most of it will be there in perpetuity.
So in other words, we will have an item where we discuss what should be on the next
meeting
meeting's
agenda.
agenda. Yeah,
Yep.
that's all I'm asking.
Yep, no, I got you. No, that's.
And I'm
yes.
just one of
The
seven.
answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. But if other people object, I'd be interested because I don't know.
No.
Okay, thank you.
And again, we're still formulating a lot of this, and
Sure.
we're working with different timing issues
Okay.
And so we may hone in on a couple items differently than we would otherwise, because we're constrained by getting to some conclusion that's going to take some time, obviously, and a lot of information and data management and technical work by a consultant. But there are also items that we can also be working on as well. So with that, if you don't mind, Chairman, there is an opportunity if this committee would choose to do it, and I'm bringing it up, without any discussion, because what I heard was a desire, as soon as we could, to maybe have a presentation from the rate consultant. I've asked them to be here for the council meeting on September 24th. They've agreed to do that. There is an opportunity if this committee would prefer, and I think we could do it as a workshop, where they could come in on the 23rd, which is a Monday. It is a day that's open. There is another committee meeting that day. I forget which one it is, but it's like 4 p.m, so it wouldn't compete with us to have a workshop in this room. That I would just say we could just call. It wouldn't really it would be more about rate philosophy, rate design, the options. So it wouldn't hone in on Boulder City's rate or rate structure specifically. It would really tell you, this is what the industry typically does. Here's options that we obviously can discuss with regards to what's normally included in the basic rate, what's included in the commodity. They could really just do a rate, I would call it a rate making workshop. That's something they're open to do if this committee desires to do that.
What time?
6 o'clock. We could do it earlier, but I know we have people that work here. So the idea was avoid the other commission meeting or committee meeting, which I forgot which one it is, but there we go. Parks and Rec, she knows. She's got the calendar.
What time is Park and Rec?
There's 4:30, and I don't think they typically go beyond an hour and a half, so I think we would be safe there. If we really wanted to be safe, we could move it to 6:30. And then at that meeting or at this meeting, we could also discuss what goes on the September, I'm getting my dates confused, whatever the first Wednesday in October meeting would be.
October 9th, okay.
So you'd put a general agenda out for the 23rd meeting?
Right.
Okay.
And then I included in the package, and it was just I did it just for the ad hoc committee. I just included, here's a number of different types of meetings that could occur going into the future, or items that can be discussed. So you guys have that. What I would suggest tonight, just because it's already 8:44, is if we schedule this workshop, and we post it and do everything we're supposed to do with regards to the workshop, because I think there will be other folks that would like to attend that from the public, and I think there's no problem with doing that. I think we want that. Then I'll give you time to look at that, and if you have any preferences on items that to be discussed at future meetings, we could certainly have that discussion then as well. I know just in my former discussions with the ad hoc committee, the item of power purchases always seemed to be a curiosity and an educational thing that a lot of people in Boulder City seem to want to understand better, and how we do the purchasing and the securing of the Hoover and the managing of the Hoover and the market purchases. And there's a potential that could be something to contemplate earlier on, because and I'm only saying that because as the director I've had that question from a lot of people in the community, and I think it would be a good item to have early on. We could have Silver State Energy Association as well come in and not only explain better what the association is and what they do for us, but how those purchases are made and what those contracts will look like, how they work with WAPA to do, and the Colorado River Commission to do the demand management.
I had one point is I think what we have to do the tasks that are assigned to us by the ordinance at the end of the day. That's why I wanted to discuss that.
Right.
So we should maybe look at on what timeline. One of the things we have to do is once a year. So I'm not even sure what that means. Does that mean once every calendar year? That means it would be due in December. If it's once a year from when this meeting was created, we have that review of the 5-year capital improvement plan would be due in, I suppose, in April.
Right.
So we have to work back from what the ordinance says we should do.
Right. And so the reason I brought up the fact that the cities is because I'm not going to say we're behind the 8 ball, but if we had started the committee at a different time, we would be reviewing in more detail the capital improvement plan that they're working on, and there's a workshop coming up next September 11th. What I would suggest this time around, and I think it's reasonable because they're going through that process, and we know we have these studies that got to be done, are going to modify that process anyway. So I'm not suggesting that it's not important that we as a committee do our job as indicated in the resolution. What I'm suggesting is we've already got those workshops scheduled we can manage that through the current city schedule this time around, but you're going to see a different modified capital improvement program probably in early spring anyway, and that really is going to be the one that we want this committee focusing on anyways, because we're going to have more information. And hopefully I'm not going to be sitting here going, we have $500,000 for pipeline rehab, but I don't know what it is. And
again, my point is we have to obey the ordinance, so we have to do it once a year.
Right.
So should we do this then in April? That would be once a year. The committee I'm not trying to do a rush job and a bad job, but we have to obey the law at some point.
Right.
So this committee was constituted in May. That means this document is due end of April, I suppose. That would be within 1 year of this committee being created.
Yep. So if you would prefer, Vice Chair, I think an easy way for us to do that, because we have some time to define that, is we can look at the schedules the city already has, and we have those, with regards to what they go through for the operating maintenance budget, which is a function of this committee, as well as the capital improvement plan for the upcoming year. And we can put a schedule in place ahead of that so that he gets to see and review that with regards to the utilities ahead of that schedule. And the staff, we can develop that. There's other things that aren't, in my mind, they're not as significant from a timing-wise perspective, like reviewing the water conservation plan. There's no real time frame tied to that. We can, I hate to use the word filler, but that could be a filler meeting. Do I think there's work this committee should provide some feedback on water conservation planning? Sure. But is it the same importance? Probably not. We already have the water conservation plan in progress. We already have stuff in our ordinance. But I think this committee could take a look at, is there more Boulder City should be doing, or is it good enough? And we should, at a minimum, here's the water conservation plan, get some feedback from the committee.
Well, I think we sort of discussed a little bit last time, and we can continue on, because I don't disagree with the tasks, but right now, since the rate is a big issue, and some of these things will sort of fall out of the rate process, even a conservation plan probably wouldn't hurt if we'll see if the rate study does that. But the way I read it, and maybe I'm technically wrong, but I'm reading it that annually review. First off, the reports that were in the original aspect did not get forwarded to this resolution. The resolution did not get the 2 annual reports in that was originally talked about at one of the council meetings. So there is no reports. Now, it doesn't mean that we won't do it, but we're not obligated. There is no legal obligation that we have to put a report out. Basically, you can read it that we annually review it. That's what we're going to do. We're going to review the process.
Right.
I'm saying is we need to do it, but without the information that we're trying to get,
and I agree with that.
We can't do a good job.
Right. And it's not unusual that a committee like this would just give when they feel the time is appropriate to give an update on the progress of the committee, what the committee is working on, just to the city council. It doesn't have to come with any recommendations.
It's
It's important for them to know what you're working on and the goals you're trying to achieve, which I think, we've talked about, so.
Well, at some point, I think in the next month or two, it would be useful for the members of the public to know what we're trying to do and on what time scale we think we'll achieve it.
Right.
I think that would be helpful, that's all I'm saying.
Yep.
Well, the problem is I'm not totally sure ourselves that we, in the next meeting, maybe in 2 meetings, we might. But
Well,
I'm sure the next
and
meeting
if you would,
we're gonna-
I'll go back to what, if you want to give staff direction, I'm more than happy to do that. We can flesh out even more based on what we know. Almost like we did with this meeting, it seemed like there was at least a general, we want a little more data on finances. Obviously, we've got a lot of work to do there, and this was really a high level where the utilities sit financially. But we know what the city's normal schedule is for the CIP. We know what their normal schedule is for O&M, so we can work with that and plan some of the meetings ahead of that, so that, and if nothing else, the committee has seen them obviously before everybody else.
Yeah, so George, does that help? Because he did have in the staff report, he's mentioned that one of what he felt, you'd almost gotten there, but I'm not sure if you'd completed your thought, is that we as a committee attend all these workshops that are highlighted.
And you can certainly do it this time around, and you can do it anytime you want, obviously, but we're just in a weird schedule because we already started this process from a citywide perspective this go round. What I would suggest that staff would provide you is we would be able to get and work on what we anticipate the future schedule to be for like next year, and work our meetings somewhat ahead of that, so we know. As an example, the city council workshop this year is next week. Well, if we were then I would say in that case, we probably should have had a decent discussion on the utility capital improvement program 1 or 2 meetings ahead of this.
Correct.
Normally. And so we can work on what that schedule would look like.
But if the committee members who can attend do our best to attend, so if I'm looking at it right, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we got 7, and right now it's the other ones in January. So you've got 3 in the next month,
right,
and then we've got 3 in the next year. And so I believe we would be doing part of our due diligence if we at least do our best to attend those.
Right.
So, George, maybe that's what I was thinking. We would still be doing a review with the best data we can at the point.
Right.
And then once the assessments come in, we work with that as best we can. But to say when we're going to have a report done until we understand when we're going to get the data, I hate to say we're going to do it in a month or 2, is I guess where I'm getting at. So maybe I misunderstood your aspect.
Well, again, to get back to what I hear what you're saying. Certainly we need information. We can't just, I know nothing. I can't write a report knowing nothing.
I don't
I just
agree
want to
with
obey the law, that's
yes.
all.
So what I would suggest is if you'll just direct us, we'll just draft a schedule for the next year based on the input we've got, and you can modify what we think those meetings could. We know obviously that the rate study is going to be an ongoing continued agenda item for all likelihood, but we can embed in the dates based on these dates where we need to review O&M budgets ahead of time. We can wherein there might be, call it a lull, where there's data being collected and work being done by consultants, and there's less for us to look at, then that might be the time to, at a minimum, we present the integrated resource plan. On the electric side, we can present what the water conservation plan, and then you guys can, so we can build a schedule that I would hope a vice chair would mostly meet what I think you're trying to get at with regards to what the committee's supposed to be doing.
I'll just say I seem to be the only one who's concerned about this, and this has 7 members, so I don't want to monopolize.
From a purely nerd engineering kind of perspective, it's always nice to have a schedule. It doesn't mean you have to comply with it 100%, but I think it makes everybody warm and fuzzy and more comfortable if we can plan out, at a minimum, the next 6 months of meetings. And it doesn't preclude this committee from planning, doing special meetings either. So keep that in mind as well.
Who can make it on the 23rd? Can everybody make it on the 23rd? And 6:30 okay to be on the safe side?
50-50.
Okay, well, if we were mostly here, then the other question is you were asking about putting everything off. If Keith, I'm not sure you're making it, do you have some comments for the next agenda? You won't be here, but still, if you want something to get us to get started on.
No, and I'll do my best to try to make it. I just need to shuffle some things around.
Okay, so I guess to answer your earlier question and to try to keep things moving forward, then if you had some things, Greg, though, that do you need to say something tonight or wait till the next meeting?
That study on the 23rd, is that going to be taped?
Sure. Yeah, that's why we wanted to have it in this meeting. So
in other
we're
words,
just taping
people that
everything.
can't attend can see the meeting live or tape delayed.
Correct. My understanding is moving forward, everything we are doing is taped. So I tried to wear a tie that didn't match on purpose. So. Or it was dark this morning. One of those two.
Yeah, so to make sure that I'm understanding, when you're looking at setting the schedule and the agenda, we're still leaving room for, as we talked about in the beginning, working parallel. So we're gaining knowledge as well as trying to
meet the obligations of the committee.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think George's point is well put. We need to make sure we're doing what the committee is supposed to be doing. There's other things beyond, we do have a tendency to focus in and hone in on the rate study, but there are those other items tied to that. So we need to get them built into the schedule.
I think we had talked before, so if I could just take a little more time. If you had shown us you had given in the package that we were going to look at the water and wastewater first and then electrical third, actually fourth, because I guess that would be we're on the second meeting.
And that was not in any, it wasn't importance, it was just, that's a meeting, it doesn't have to be in that order.
Electrical has a lot of the cost related to it and sometimes some of the confusing aspect. I would prefer to move the electrical forward. So if you're going to have something for us next meeting, the reason I'm bringing it up now, I would see that. Now, does anybody on the committee agree?
Yep.
Yeah, I think the electrical costs are the biggest driver that this advisory committee would like to look at and get a better understanding on, because a lot of projects, like we were talking about, the capital projects, were already planned. They weren't implemented, so where'd the money go? In other words, it should have a reserve, or it should have an account somewhere where this money's held in reserve for the projects that never got done or completed, and this money should be able to follow through. So right now, the one is the 69 kV tie. I know the money's been allocated, the money's been budgeted. I know it's being worked on. I know the company who's got the contract, but there's been no activity and people are chomping at the bit because they see that money is in the millions of dollars and there's been nothing progressed on it.
Correct.
No survey stakes, no identifiers, no lines, nothing.
Yep.
And they're going, where'd the money go?
We can, it's sitting there. It's obvious, it's obligated now because the contract is executed. But yes, I agree. We can absolutely give an update on those projects. And there's no doubt those projects are the most significant.
Well, they're the drivers to complete this city into having a good, robust electrical system
Right.
that can be depended upon when something goes sideways in another area. That's what I cut my teeth on as an infant, all the way up to when I retired. And I'm very interested in that. And the reason most people talk about water over electricity is water drives the generators for electricity. So that's how come it says water and power. Doesn't say power and water.
Yep.
So the driver for these prime movers is going to be water. So like the vice chair has said, that the water is very important, because what happens is when our Hoover contract A and B fails on us, we have to go out and buy purchase power on open market. We're going to be in for a real good shock. To sidebar, I just got my Edison bill. They have tacked on a fee for the fire damage over in California, and now my electric rate base is 19 cents a kilowatt. Okay, that's base, and the base on that is 745 kW. So when you go above 745, the base then doubles. And now I just got a notice that on Thursday, they're going to go quadruple rate between 4 and 9 p.m. on Thursday afternoon because of the heat. So we are very blessed to have what we have, and that's what the people have to understand.
We are. I agree with everything you just said.
So I guess,
We also have our own fire department.
so if we can clarify to help move things along, that, so for item number 6, the future meetings, and future tasks, so we can work on your aspect, George, more, and we have more time. What type of timeframe do you expect the consultant's presentation to be, or discussion?
As short or long as, no longer than 2 hours.
Okay, so if that's the case, then we won't have much time for this conversation either.
Okay, no longer than an hour and a half. Yeah, we can definitely guide them on how long they can take. I think this committee's pretty up to speed on a lot of this stuff. I think it's just good to hear from them because they've got all the experience they have, and it also gives you the opportunity to know who we're working with as we move forward. So I think it's beneficial to have them here to present to us. I can talk to them. I suspect really if we wanted to, we could keep it at an hour, and that would leave us some time to discuss future meeting agenda.
Well, if people or if the group committee is willing to work, I'm willing to spend more time. If we're starting at 6:30, then we'd assume in 8:30 or 9 before we would be finished. I want to gain as much knowledge as we can. I don't want to cut them too short, but from what we're trying to do tonight, I'm seeing that I'm assuming it'd take us half an hour minimally to try to get some of the stuff flushed out.
Yeah, I think given today's date, we as staff can draft a decent calendar schedule for you to discuss at the 23rd, so you have something to work with.
Okay, and so yeah, I'd say if they can suggest what they think would be best time frame, but an hour I believe is too short.
Yeah.
So if they think they can do something reasonable in an hour
I'll talk to
and a half, then that might be good. Otherwise, it depends on people how long they're willing to stay on that date. So just so we know in advance a little bit of what time frame to expect is all.
Yep.
So I think, does anybody else have any comments on the futures to try to get some things going? If we have it, yours information, and then people can think about the tasks a little bit more and see what we've got going forward. But I think a lot of it's going to be driven by how soon we get the information on the rate study. Because if that's as detailed as you're indicating, then that will give us a lot more information on what's going on.
Yep. And we, I think, have a good idea of what that schedule looks like by the 23rd as well. What will be somewhat open is the capital. So
if we're good with that one, then we have the last public comment period. Do I need to read this last statement, or is that just okay? Each person has up to 5 minutes to speak The discretion of the chair, comments made during the public comment period of the agenda may be on any subject. All remarks shall be addressed to the chair or to the committee as a whole, not to any individual member of the committee, of the audience, or of the city staff. There shall be no personal attacks against the chair, members of the utility committee, or the city staff, or any other individual. No person other than members of the utility advisory committee and the person who has the floor shall be permitted to enter into any discussion, either directly or through a member of the utility advisory committee without the permission of the chair or presiding officer. No action may be taken on a matter raised under this item of the agenda until the matter itself has been specifically included on agenda as an item upon which action will be taken. Is there any comments?
Again, for the record, Fred Volz. In going to the 4-page capital improvement project listing that was presented tonight, it's important to note that there was no double counting of the projects in the $40 million budgeted, specifically the $2.777 million that was on page 1. $26 million is likely sitting and earning little to no interest on projects that have been approved but have not been started or completed out of that $40 million. That means only 34% of the projects have been completed, and it really begs the question, how are we going to be more timely about working on these projects going forward so that the construction costs don't continue to escalate? Because the interest that the money is earning in a money market account with a federally insured bank certainly doesn't equal the amount of money that is going to be consumed by increased construction costs. So hopefully that would be something for future discussion at one of the committee meetings. Also, as far as improvement suggestions on the way the spreadsheet was presented, it would really be helpful if the columns were totaled without any duplications rather than each person having to manually do that. Secondly, the projects need to be put in date order rather than just sort of thrown on the page with 2015, 2019, 2017 appearing randomly. And finally, it was deeply disturbing to hear tonight that the city staff have made this unilateral decision of consultants, because when this committee was appointed, one of the main reasons it was created was to create a level of involvement and trust from the public toward the city that has been sorely lacking in times past. And that apparently has just been run right over by what's happened here. There was clear notice on the night that the council in June appointed the committee that the expectation was the committee would have some sort of role in selecting these consultants. And now we've learned tonight that city staff had just plowed right ahead, even though it was on the list of action items that was given out 3 days after the close of the contract period, or I should say the RFP period. And here we are now with a selection process. Nothing was included in the package tonight to indicate how these two companies were selected. It could easily have been added. It was not. It's just as though the city wanted to go ahead with this on its own, and the heck with anybody else and their input. And that was not the intent of this committee. And I want to be on record tonight as opposing the way the city staff proceeded on this issue. Thank you.
Any additional comments? Okay, thank you. So I believe that ends the meeting, so I'll ask for a first for adjournment.
I'll second.
And vote, everybody.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you all for attending. Thanks for